Chapter 1486. The Divine Emperor's roar silenced the entire imperial court. No one dared to utter a single word. Everyone was as quiet as cicadas in winter. "Do you really think I can't lift my knife?" The Divine Emperor, sitting on the high seat, raised his eyebrows, which made the hearts of the courtiers tremble. When the Divine Emperor was angry, he could kill millions of people. How dare King Pingyang challenge the Divine Emperor's bottom line? This guy, doesn't he know how to write the word death? The courtiers all cursed in their minds. After so many years, the first morning court of the Xiai Divine Dynasty had opened in such a funny way. Perhaps because the taste of the fried oyster pancake was too delicious, the whole palace was filled with its aroma. The Divine Emperor was furious, and King Pingyang was taken aback. Did he dare to eat it? Did he? Of course not. He could only stare at the Divine Emperor with wide eyes. He just wanted to have breakfast. Step by step, the Divine Emperor walked down from his seat with his hands clasped behind his back. Like a dormant dragon, the courtiers present did not even dare to breathe. The Divine Emperor walked up to Hu Pingyang, who was staring at him with wide eyes. His eyes fell on the fried oyster pancake in Hu Pingyang's hand. The oil was flowing on the pancake, and a faint aroma and vitality were spreading. This feeling was a little different from the others. Hu Pingyang swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He felt that the Divine Emperor's gaze was as sharp as a knife, cutting him until all the hairs on his body stood on end. "Your Majesty." Hu Pingyang took a deep breath and wanted to say something. He felt that if he didn't say something, he might be killed by the Divine Emperor's glare. Suddenly, Hu Pingyang's pupils constricted. He found that the fried oyster pancake in his hand was gone. "Oh!" Hu Pingyang's hair stood on end as he stared at the Divine Emperor in front of him. The Divine Emperor grabbed the fried oyster pancake and shoved it into his mouth. After chewing for a while, he stopped abruptly. Hu Pingyang roared in his heart. That fried oyster pancake was his, but he had begged Bu Fong for it, and the Divine Emperor had eaten it so irresponsibly. Hu Pingyang and the God Emperor's relationship was considered good. Back then, they had both charged into battle and shared the same pot of rice, so they did not dislike each other. But Hu Pingyang's heart ached. That fried oyster was a rare delicacy. The aura of the law of life. After eating the fried oyster, the Divine Emperor's eyes suddenly lit up like the brightest star in the night sky. Under the Divine Emperor's sharp gaze, the ministers kept retreating. A dish containing the law of life? The Divine Emperor took a deep breath. After eating a piece of oyster pancake, he could even feel that the power of the Great Tribulation, which had been spreading around his body like maggots and tarsal bones, was actually suppressed at this moment. That's right, the power of the Great Calamity was suppressed. That nightmarish feeling weakened quite a bit. How is this possible? A dish can actually suppress my Great Tribulation. The Divine Emperor's eyes were filled with disbelief. He looked at Hu Pingyang and then looked around. Then, a bright light flickered on his face, as if he was excited and looking forward to it. "Hu Pingyang, let this emperor ask you, where did this delicacy come from?" "At the restaurant." The sky was just beginning to brighten. The group of people outside the restaurant had already gone crazy. The aroma was like a bomb that exploded in the crowd, charring them on the outside and making them unable to extricate themselves. Inside the restaurant, Luo, Sanyang, Summer, and the others ate contentedly. Bu Fong cleaned up the plates and returned to the kitchen. A commotion rang out in the crowd. One by one, the figures separated. Although they were still immersed in the delicacy, most of them were shocked by the figure in front of them. The Crown Prince. It's the Crown Prince. I heard he's going to be a waiter in this restaurant. He looks awesome. This restaurant is too awesome. The people around them murmured excitedly. In the distance, the Crown Prince, with disheveled hair and a long white robe, walked barefoot toward the restaurant. His eyes flashed, and his aura was extremely powerful. Even though he was here to be a waiter, he was still very arrogant. Of course, he couldn't be arrogant in front of Bu Fong because he was defeated by Bu Fong. This was also what made him feel aggrieved. He was a crown prince who had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, yet he had to work as a waiter in a shabby restaurant. What kind of humiliation was that? He, the crown prince, wanted to see who, as a waiter, dared to ask him to serve them. The corners of the Crown Prince's mouth twitched slightly as he laughed. He looked very cool and at ease. Bufong walked out of the kitchen, leaned against the door, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked indifferently at Crown Prince, who had just stepped into the restaurant. The Crown Prince's aura fluctuated, and his eyes shone brightly. "Since you lost the bet, here I am." The Crown Prince looked straight at Bufong and said. His tone was neither servile nor overbearing, filled with dignity. The surrounding experts were also intimidated by the Crown Prince's aura and didn't dare to move. With the Crown Prince as a waiter, who would dare to come to the restaurant to eat? Many people felt that Bufong's decision was really wrong. Bufong glanced at the Crown Prince with an expressionless face. Then, he rummaged through the system's storage space for a while. Before long, he took out a neat uniform. With a clatter, he threw it to the Crown Prince. "Tie up your hair and put on your uniform. You are here to be a waiter, not to take a bath," Bufong said. The Crown Prince's face froze. He glanced at the uniform on the ground, and his eyes seemed to be spewing fire. "I am a Crown Prince. How can I wear the robe of a servant? I'd rather die than submit." Bufong twitched the corner of his mouth and gave the Crown Prince an indifferent look. He'd rather die than submit? Why was he so unyielding? "Blackie, lend me your dog bone," Bufong said. Lord Go, lying under the path understanding tree, rolled his eyes. "That's a heaven god's bone, not a dog bone," Lord Go corrected him. Nevertheless, Lord Go handed the dog bone to Bufong. Holding the heaven god's bone, he turned his eyes and rested them on the Crown Prince. "I heard that you'd rather die than submit. Why do you insist on your own will?" Bufong said. The Crown Prince's expression changed dramatically, and the skin on his face began to tremble like a sieve. He took a deep breath. A look of horror came into his eyes. The Heaven God's bone was a terrible artifact that could blow up black and white. Although he was talented in terms of realm and fighting prowess, he was far inferior to black and white. He didn't dare to be hit by the bone. He couldn't bear the consequences. Wait. The Crown Prince raised a hand and sternly stopped Bufong. "Imperial Father said that being a waiter here is actually a chance for me to train my mental state, so I won't reject your request." After saying that, the Crown Prince picked up the uniform from the ground. Rumble. The uniform fluttered, and the Crown Prince put on his clothes. A red ribbon fluttered in the wind, and his hair was immediately tied up with it. He even lovingly tied a bow on it. Very good. Bufong was very satisfied with the Crown Prince's adaptability. This was the kind of obedient employee the restaurant needed. After returning the Heaven God's bone to Lord Go, Bufong patted the Crown Prince on the shoulder. "I have high hopes for you. You will definitely become an excellent waiter," Bufong said seriously. Then, he turned to the group of diners outside and said, "The restaurant's business officially begins today." Bufong's voice rang out. A commotion broke out outside the door. The Crown Prince stood behind Bufong with a sneer on his face. He wanted to see who dared to eat in his restaurant. He was the Crown Prince. Would they dare to ask the Crown Prince to serve them? Did they deserve it? In fact, it was just as the Crown Prince thought. The Crown Prince was the heir to the divine emperor's throne. Who dared to ask him to serve them? Especially the heads of aristocratic families. Once they were remembered by the Crown Prince, when the divine emperor's great tribulation came at that time, even if they were aristocratic families, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences, so even if Bufong announced the opening of the restaurant, very few people came to the restaurant to eat. It could even be said that there was basically no one. Except for Luo, Sanyang, and Summer, who were already in the restaurant. Summer ordered the oyster pancake. Although the fried oyster was delicious, he still liked the oyster pancake. Luo Sanyang looked at the menu and ordered sweet and sour ribs. Yes, it was the Lord Go's favorite sweet and sour ribs. Seeing the Lord Go eat happily, Luo Sanyang's heart itched. "Remember the name of the dish and tell me at the window," Bufong said, looking at the Crown Prince. After that, Bufong turned, lifted the curtain, and entered the kitchen. Ting-a-ling. The curtain fell, causing the bell on the door to jingle. "Oh." The Crown Prince kept a straight face and was a little confused. He was struggling in his heart. not knowing whether he should do as Bufong said. Hey, if you make a mistake, you'll be stripped again. Don't blame me for not reminding you that Xiao Bai is a professional at stripping. In the kitchen, Bufong's indifferent voice drifted out. Buzz at the door, Xiao Bai's figure emerged. His mechanical eyes flashed, and there was a bright light flowing in them. The Crown Prince and Xiao Bai looked at each other. The man and the puppet seemed to be frozen on the spot. After a long time, the Crown Prince still didn't move. The Crown Prince didn't seem to believe it. He was a dignified imperial prince, so how could he be stripped naked by a puppet? The Crown Prince was very proud. It was a coincidence that he lost to Bufong. This puppet didn't seem to have a strong aura. Could it be that he couldn't defeat Bufong, but a puppet? Ridiculous. The Crown Prince clasped his hands behind his back and stood still. It's impossible for me to serve you, not in this life. The Crown Prince thought proudly. Suddenly, a sigh drifted out of the kitchen. Bufong sighed softly. Then, Xiao Bai, who stood in front of the Crown Prince, moved. But Xiao Bai's eyes flickered. The next moment, he appeared in front of the Crown Prince. Ridiculous. Do you think I'm afraid of a mere puppet? The Crown Prince sneered. He could even fight a god king. So what was a puppet to him? Damn it. The Crown Prince was shocked, because Xiao Bai's palm, which was as big as a cattail leaf fan, was coming straight toward the Crown Prince's upper body. The Crown Prince gave a long roar. The power of law in his body surged. Although he had promised the Divine Emperor that he would come to the restaurant as a waiter, as the Crown Prince, he naturally had his pride. How could he give in so easily? Besides, how could he really become a waiter? If it weren't for the heart demon and the Divine Emperor's request, he would never have come. Bam! The Crown Prince's palm, which contained the two supreme laws of the universe, collided with Xiao Bai. The confident smile on the Crown Prince's face soon froze. He found that the power of law in his palm was crumbling the Crown Prince. Rip! A tearing sound rang out. The Crown Prince felt the world spin. Then, the scene in front of him changed dramatically. His body felt cold as the wind blew against him. With a bang, the Crown Prince flew through the air and smashed outside the restaurant. Summer looked at the Crown Prince sympathetically. Xiao Bai's puppet could even strip silver armor, a god king. Although the Crown Prince was strong, after being immune to the laws, he was no match for silver armor. How could he resist Xiao Bai? Xiao Bai stripped the Crown Prince's clothes and uniform, carefully folded them, and placed them on the ground. His mechanical eyes looked sincerely at the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was dumbfounded. He hurriedly put on his clothes, his face cold. Boom! Just as the Crown Prince was putting on his clothes in the distance after eating the fried oyster pancake, Hades' Era sat on the ground. His eyes flashed with bright light, and his body surged with mighty power as he began to break through to the demigod realm. Chapter 1487. Hades' Era was about to break through. He had been holding back for so long, and after experiencing the prosperity of the shy great world, he was finally about to break through. Of course, he had also eaten countless precious treasures. After all, Bufong had an extraordinary status in the Divine Chef Temple, and Hades' Era had made a lot of trouble in the temple by borrowing Bufong's name. A lot of cultivation resources had been poured on him. Moreover, he had been stimulated by Bufong's fried oyster pancake. Although Bufong did not deliberately make the fried oyster pancake have any function to help a breakthrough at Bufong's current level, any dish he cooked would have incredible power. Nether King Erha's breakthrough was out of everyone's expectation, but it was reasonable. Of course, breaking through to the demigod realm was nothing to be surprised about. In the Divine Dynasty, there were many juniors who had broken through to the demigod realm. Compared to the Crown Prince's streaking, Hades' Era's breakthrough did not attract anyone's attention. The Crown Prince's face was a little dark. Would he be stripped for a mistake? He really didn't believe that it was possible. He went back into the restaurant and stared at Xiao Bai with great vigilance. As the Crown Prince, he had been tricked the first time. So how could he be tricked the second time? Did he really think he was a fool? The people around him widened their eyes again and stared at the Crown Prince. Sure enough, the Crown Prince entered the restaurant with a rebellious heart. Not long after, The Crown Prince's white body was sent flying, crashing to the ground once more. The atmosphere at that moment was awkward. Everyone widened their eyes and admired the Crown Prince's fleshly body. The Crown Prince gave in. After being stripped 3 times, he put on his clothes at lightning speed and rushed into the restaurant. Owner Boo, 1 sweet and sour ribs and 1 oyster pancake. The Crown Prince leaned against the window and shouted at the top of his lungs under Xiao Bai's gaze. The crowd burst into an uproar. The Crown Prince had really become a waiter in this restaurant. This is really too exciting. Many diners looked at each other and saw the eagerness in each other's eyes. Were they going to eat in a restaurant? This way, they could experience the services that the Crown Prince brought, just when the group of people were hesitating. In the kitchen, Bu Fong had finished cooking. A rich fragrance wafted out from it. Bu Fong placed the 2 dishes on the window of the restaurant, knocked on the door, and yelled at the Crown Prince, "Bring the dishes over." Remember, when the customers finish their dishes, they must take their plates back in time. Bu Fong's words made the Crown Prince's eyes turn red. Did Bu Fong really treat him, the Crown Prince, as a waiter? He had to clear the plates. That was the job of the servants. Didn't we agree that it would be fine as long as everyone expressed their intentions? Crown Prince wanted to refuse, but the cold glint in his mechanical eyes made his heart tremble. He was really afraid of being stripped naked. Forget it. I'll just live a peaceful life for now. I'll just take it as training my mind. The Crown Prince closed his eyes tightly, turned his head away, and walked into the distance. Soon, he reached out with 2 dishes in his hands. The sweet and sour ribs glowed brilliantly. A rich fragrance wafted out of it, making the Crown Prince's nose twitch. He didn't expect that the dishes in this restaurant seemed to be so good. The Crown Prince opened his eyes, surprised and bewildered. The glowing sweet and sour ribs made him swallow a mouthful of saliva. The taste seems to be very good as well. The Crown Prince brought the sweet and sour ribs to Luo Sanyang's table. Holding the oyster pancake in one hand, he stared at the sweet and sour ribs. Luo Sanyang took a deep breath. The rich fragrance tickled her nostrils. Luo Sanyang could not help but let out a charming smile. Mr. Boo's dishes are definitely worth looking forward to. She grabbed a pair of chopsticks and happily picked up a piece of sweet and sour ribs. She was about to put it into her mouth when she stopped, because he was standing next to her. Holding the oyster pancake in one hand, the Crown Prince smacked his lips and stared at the sweet and sour ribs on Luo Sanyang's plate. That gaze, that expression, it was a little awkward. Luo Sanyang hesitated for a moment. Then, she thought of the prince's identity. She couldn't help but pout her red lips. "Your Highness, please eat," Luo Sanyang said reluctantly. The Crown Prince's eyes lit up, and he gave Luo Sanyang an appreciative look. "Although I'm just taking a look, since you're so enthusiastic, I won't stand on ceremony." The Crown Prince pursed his lips and said. After saying that, he picked up his chopsticks and picked up the sweet and sour ribs. Rip! The sound of clothes ripping resounded. The Crown Prince's white body was sent flying again. Xia Xia's figure floated and caught the oyster pancake that was flying into the air. He looked sympathetically at the Crown Prince, who had been stripped naked, then grabbed an oyster pancake and stuffed it into his mouth. Poor disciple. He must have felt the fear of being dominated by a crazy, clothes-stripping demon. The Crown Prince burst into tears. As a prince, couldn't he even eat a dish? Perhaps this was the cultivation of a waiter. Buzz, in the distance, Hades' era's breakthrough had begun to reach the final stage. Around his body, the power of laws slowly emerged. He was comprehending the law that belonged to him. As long as he comprehended the law, he would be considered a demigod. The Crown Prince put on his uniform again and walked in the restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes were sharp as he stared outside. Except for Xia Xia and Luo Sanyang, he wanted to see who else dared to enter the restaurant. If they dared to take half a step into the restaurant, he would definitely kill them with his eyes. It was not easy to enjoy the one-stop service of the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince smiled coldly. Dong! The deafening sound of a golden gong rang out. The sound seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens. The Crown Prince paused for a moment, then focused. It was the sound of a golden gong in the imperial palace, which represented the end of the morning court. It was a pity that if he didn't come to the restaurant to work as a waiter, he would be holding a meeting in the court at this moment. He could feel his father's awe-inspiring majesty. The morning court of the Divine Emperor was naturally spectacular. It was not like the morning court held by the imperial concubine. The whole morning court was simply a forum for the internal forces of the Mo family. The courtiers in the court did not even bother to attend. The crown prince sighed and suddenly felt a little lonely. As the son of the Divine Emperor, he was under a lot of pressure. When the morning court was over, the courtiers should have left. Each of them had important things to do. These courtiers and kings were the pillars of the Xiai divine dynasty. Without them, the Xiai divine dynasty might have fallen apart long ago. At the thought of this, the crown prince became a little solemn. They were all respectable people. Bam! Xiao Bai's huge palm slapped the crown prince on the top of his head. The crown prince's face froze. "I'm just in a daze. There's no need to strip me, is there?" The crown prince looked at Xiao Bai with some grief and indignation. "Even if I teach him a lesson, I should be moderate. Do you really think I, the crown prince, can't lift my knife?" Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. He patted the crown prince on the head again, then raised his hand and pointed into the distance. The crown prince snorted. Who dared to come to the restaurant when he was the crown prince? He turned his head. An uproar broke out. An uproar broke out in the crowd. The crowd parted to the sides. Their eyes widened as they watched one expert after another whose bodies seemed to be blooming with golden light stride toward them. The aura of these experts was extremely vigorous and fearsome. "It's Censor Chun. It's King Tianlong. Isn't that the minister of the Ministry of Rights and the minister of the Ministry of Personnel?" The crowd was dumbfounded as they watched a group of high-ranking officials and nobles file into the restaurant. These people all had extraordinary identities. As the crown prince had said, each of them was the pillar of the divine dynasty, the pillar of the divine dynasty. These experts were all smiling and chatting with each other. When they stepped into the restaurant and saw the crown prince dressed as a waiter, they were all slightly taken aback. Then, he patted the crown prince on the shoulder with a smile. Everyone found a seat and sat down. King Pingyang's face was flushed as he strode into the restaurant. "Make way. All of you, make way," King Pingyang said seriously to the group of people crowding at the door. Startled, the experts of the aristocratic families stepped back. A figure in a golden dragon robe stepped into the restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. Hiss! The whole place was filled with the sound of people sucking in cold breaths. The Divine Emperor. The Divine Emperor came to the restaurant in person. The morning court session has just ended. What the hell? Isn't His Majesty busy with affairs every day? Why does he have time to eat in the restaurant? The experts of the aristocratic families were all going crazy. The Divine Emperor was a noble figure, so they did not dare to be presumptuous. They all stepped back and bowed their heads respectfully to the Divine Emperor. The Divine Emperor clasped his hands behind his back, and gold armor followed behind him. The two of them stepped into the restaurant amidst King Pingyang's laughter. At this moment, the deserted restaurant suddenly became lively. The crown prince's face was a little stiff. It was his father's business. He had to do it, and he did not dare to refuse. For a moment, the crown prince was a little hesitant. He took a deep breath, then exhaled it all of a sudden. The next moment, he approached the crown prince with a big smile on his face. "Oh, my dear guest, please sit here." The crown prince, dressed in a uniform and smiling, led the Divine Emperor to an excellent seat. The Divine Emperor in gold armor sat down. The Divine Emperor looked calm, but gold armor was dumbfounded as he looked at the smiling crown prince. How could someone as proud as the crown prince integrate into the role of a waiter so easily? "What would you like to eat, my dear guests? There's a menu behind me. I am Xia Yi, a waiter in the restaurant. You can call me Crown Prince. Don't you know what to eat? It doesn't matter. I'll introduce it to you. Sweet and sour ribs, a superb delicacy. It smells like—" The Crown Prince was about to speak. However, he was stopped by the Divine Emperor before he could finish. The Divine Emperor was very satisfied with the Crown Prince's performance. This boy has integrated into the role very quickly. However, he didn't come here for other dishes. He came here for the fried oyster pancake. Ask Owner Boo to order a fried oyster pancake, the Divine Emperor said. The Crown Prince's eyes focused. The Crown Prince's eyes narrowed, and he nodded solemnly. Then, he turned to the window and ordered an oyster pancake. I don't have fried oyster pancake. It's not a delicacy for sale. Order something else. Bufong's faint voice came from the kitchen. The Crown Prince's face froze. No, the Divine Emperor wants to eat it, and you dare to say you don't have it? Why don't you go to heaven, you chef? It's the Divine Emperor who wants to eat it. Owner Boo, please make another dish. The Crown Prince frowned and reminded the Divine Emperor. I said I don't have it. If the boss says he doesn't have it, just tell him the truth. Do you want to be stripped again? Bufong's lazy voice rang out from the kitchen again. The Crown Prince's face turned red. He was almost King angered to death by this chef. The Crown Prince's face turned slightly unsightly. Well, it's fine if you don't have it. Owner Boo, can you tell me when you will make the fried oyster pancake again? Where does the aura of the law of life in the fried oyster pancake come from? The Divine Emperor's gentle voice rang out. Ting-a-ling. The kitchen curtain was lifted. Bufong walked out. He looked at the Divine Emperor in surprise. The Divine Emperor actually cared about the aura of the law of life in the oyster pancake. It was not strong, and it might have come from the oysters soaked in the spring of life. The Divine Emperor smiled gently at Bufong. However, there was a hint of anxiety in his smile. His anxiety gave Bufong pause. What's the hurry? Rumble. A wave of rumbling suddenly resounded. The Divine Emperor and many experts' attention was attracted by it. Puzzled, Bufong looked over and saw Hades Era, who was sitting cross-legged with a pillar of law crashing down from above his head. Has this guy begun to accept the baptism of the power of law? Bufong was a little curious about what law Hades Era was comprehending. Could it be the law of spicy strips? After all, this guy has eaten so many spicy strips. Rumble. All of a sudden, a strange aura surged out. There seemed to be a golden wheel of law emerging in the sky, and a terrible rumbling sound swept out. Everyone present was stunned. This is the rhythm of comprehending the supreme law of the universe. Hades Era opened his eyes. He breathed out a long sigh. Around his body, there was a strange power of laws spreading out. One after another, wisps of ethereal, immortal energy flowed out. Bathed in this energy, Hades Era opened his mouth and let out an enchanting moan. Gold Armor, who was standing next to the Divine Emperor, suddenly froze. He rose to his feet with a whoosh. One of the supreme laws of the universe. The law of life. The Divine Emperor's body tensed up at this moment, and his aura fluctuated. Chapter 1488. The Law of Life. Whether it was the Divine Emperor or the other courtiers present, they were all shocked. Everyone stared at Hades Era in disbelief. At this moment, he looked like a peerless immortal. His body was surrounded by wisps of white gas, and with a single thought, he seemed to be able to gush out a mighty life force. Yes, this was indeed the law of life. No one in the Xiaoyi divine dynasty had comprehended the law of life. The law of life was too rare. Even a genius like the Crown Prince had only comprehended the law of space and the law of destruction. The law of life was the most profound law under the law of transmigration. Phew! Everyone present breathed a sigh of relief. Their eyes glowed brightly as they stared at Hades Era. A demigod had comprehended the law of life. A look of excitement came over Gold Armor's face. He never thought that Hades Era would comprehend the law of life at this moment. This restaurant is really full of geniuses. Whether it was the black dog lying on the ground, the fox who had eaten the heaven god's blood, or the owner, they are all extraordinary geniuses. Even that woman is a curse goddess. Bufong looked indifferently at Hades Era. Bufong was quite surprised. He thought that Hades Era would comprehend some strange law. The fluctuation of the breakthrough did not last long. Soon, Hades' era's aura slowly sank. He opened his eyes, which seemed to have white light swirling in them. He stretched, and a crackling sound rang out from his body. He had finally broken through. He, Hades' era, was now a man who could be called a demigod. Now he had surpassed his father, Tian Song. He was the best. Oh, Hades' era suddenly felt a little strange. One powerful aura after another had sealed his body. Gold armor, the divine emperor, Bufong, the crown prince, and the others were all staring at him. He was under a lot of pressure. Hades' era blinked. Were these people jealous of his handsomeness? The law of life? There seemed to be some excitement on the divine emperor's old face. This expression caused Hades' era's hair to stand on end. In the divine emperor's eyes, Hades' era felt as though he had been stripped of all his clothes. Hades' era, was straight, not bent. Your Majesty, please behave yourself. Hades' era was roaring in his heart. It's a pity that you've only begun to comprehend the law of life, and you're only a demigod. Your comprehension of the law of life isn't deep enough, so you can't help me suppress the calamity, the divine emperor lamented. The emperor god walked up to Hades' era and raised his hand. She covered Hades' era's hand with her own. Hades' era narrowed his eyes. In his divine sense, he could only feel a majestic and boundless aura coming towards him. This was the power of a god emperor. This was the aura of a god emperor. Hades' era sucked in a cold breath. He was thoroughly impressed by the old man in front of him. However, Hades' era, who had comprehended the law of life, could feel a black hole spinning in the divine emperor's body. The black hole seemed to be devouring everything. It was devouring the divine emperor's life force, spirit, and energy, and it seemed to be brewing a terrible calamity. The divine emperor withdrew his hand and sighed. He patted Hades' era on the head, then turned his eyes to Bufong. Although Hades' era had comprehended the law of life, the supreme law of the universe, his strength was too weak and useless. In the divine emperor's opinion, it was not as effective as Bufong's oyster pancakes. In the entire chaotic universe, in addition to the top heaven god of life, there was also the immortal empress of the immortal spirit divine dynasty who had cultivated the law of life to its peak. However, she could not travel millions of miles to the Shai divine dynasty to save the divine emperor. After all, as the ruler of the divine dynasty, her every move would trigger terrible changes. The oyster pancake did not contain much of the law of life, but Bufong did not expect that it could suppress the calamity in the divine emperor's body. The surrounding ministers were also incomparably excited. Everyone was staring at Bufong. The divine emperor represented the Shai divine dynasty. Once he fell, the entire dynasty would fall into a period of decline for at least hundreds of years. This was the most precarious time for the divine dynasty. In the past, at this time, the crown prince should have grown up and could stand on his own. However, the current crown prince, because of his extraordinary talent, was still a demigod and had not broken through to the god realm. Therefore, the divine dynasty was in danger. Whether it was the Titan divine dynasty or the immortal spirit divine dynasty, they could easily seize this opportunity to launch an attack and destroy the Shai divine dynasty. Of course, once the divine emperor was gone, the current crown prince might not be able to suppress those first-class great worlds under the Shai divine dynasty's jurisdiction. For example, the Dragon Valley and the Phoenix Nest. If these great worlds rebelled, the Shai divine dynasty, which had lost its divine emperor, might not be able to withstand it. If Bufong could suppress the divine emperor's calamity, it would be a great merit for the entire Shai divine dynasty. Bufong was slightly taken aback by this. Swish! Bufong poured a glass of wine. It was the Acheron of helplessness. Brewed with the spring of life, it should contain a stronger aura of life than the oyster pancake. Bufong handed the divine emperor a glass of wine. First, Bufong wanted to confirm if the spring of life was really the reason for suppressing the divine emperor's calamity. Gulp! Without hesitation, the divine emperor poured the wine into his mouth. The wine, which contained a rich aura of life, entered his mouth. Under the gazes of all the officials, the divine emperor shook his head. "It's a good wine, but it can't suppress the calamity in my body like the oyster pancake." The divine emperor sighed and smacked his lips. He smacked his lips. The god emperor was also a wine lover. If drinking wine could cure diseases, it would be the best news for the divine emperor. Bufang nodded thoughtfully. It seemed that he could only use the oyster pancake. Perhaps it was because the soaked oysters had purified the law of life? Bufang didn't quite understand. The divine emperor and the others didn't stay in the restaurant for too long. They just came because of the oyster pancake. After learning that there was no oyster pancake, the divine emperor left. After noting down the cooking time of the oyster pancake the next day, he left one after another. Of course, some of the officials still stayed in the restaurant to eat. They only left after they had eaten and drunk enough. The crown prince seemed to be getting more and more comfortable with being a waiter. Perhaps after serving him once, it would be easier for him to accept the second time. In any case, the crown prince was no longer so resistant. Of course, he was still a little proud. Unless he met the divine emperor, the crown prince was always cold and aloof to other diners. He didn't say a word and just quietly did his job as a waiter. It was late at night. The restaurant's door was closed. The crown prince took off his uniform. With a cold face, he indifferently looked at Bufang, who had just walked out of the kitchen. He snorted arrogantly, then turned around and left. When he reached the restaurant's door, he whistled. In the sky, an extremely luxurious warship flew over. As the crown prince, his ship was naturally luxurious and extraordinary. With a swish, the luxurious warship turned into a beam of light, crossing the sky. Bufang was a little speechless as he watched the crown prince leave arrogantly. He had wanted to invite the crown prince to have a meal with him. In that case, he would just forget about it. Turning around and returning to the kitchen, Bufang brought out steaming hot, fragrant, and delicious spicy blood lobsters, placing them on the table. You, Hades Era, Lord Go, and the others all gathered around. After eating and drinking, they all went back to their rooms. Those who cultivated went back to cultivate, and those who slept went back to sleep. Time passed slowly like this. Every day, Bufang opened the restaurant and watched the turnover grow. He always felt indescribably comfortable. Because the restaurant was under the divine emperor's protection, no one dared to cause trouble. So sometimes Bufang would cook. When he had nothing to do, he would go to the divine chef temple, where the ancient heaven god's inheritance was sealed, and try to break the seal. However, the next seal was very difficult, and it was basically very difficult for Bufang to break it. Unless his cultivation base broke through to the god realm. Of course, Bufang was not in a hurry. Summer had left. She had left the divine dynasty's capital half a year ago. According to her, she had gone to the ancient heaven god's inheritance to break through to a higher realm. Bufang felt it was a little pity. Summer had been able to show her deterrence in the restaurant. Now that she was gone, Bufang had to face the divine chef temple's elders in person. So, Bufang stayed in the restaurant every day. When he had nothing to do, he leaned against the balcony behind the restaurant and laid down in a rocking chair. Then he rocked and rocked. Every time a crown prince saw Bufang like this, he would curse Bufang in his heart for not making progress. He regarded losing to Bufang as the shame of his life. He could not believe that he was defeated by such an unambitious guy. After that morning court session, the divine dynasty was in chaos. A large number of soldiers attacked. Groups of heavy armored soldiers rushed into the ancient heaven god's inheritance. Some of them landed in the various great worlds around the Xiai divine dynasty. They were searching for the terrible creature that the divine emperor had mentioned. Bufang was also very concerned about this news. After all, it was this creature that separated him from the Lord Go and the others. In the first month of the heavy attack, they didn't gain anything, and no one learned anything about that terrifying creature. However, the divine emperor was not discouraged. Those who were about to face a great tribulation would always feel an inexplicable sense of urgency. So they continued to search. In the second month, they found traces of the creature. A third-class great world around the Xiai divine dynasty had turned into a land of death. All of the living beings fell one after another, leaving behind only strange black spheres. These balls covered the surface of the third-class great world. The divine dynasty's soldiers landed in the great world. They were ambushed, one creature after another, which was very similar to what the divine emperor had described, attacked them. A great battle broke out. This was a unique battle that was extremely tragic. It was a one-sided massacre. In the lair of the horrible creature, a squad of the divine dynasty's soldiers was completely wiped out. The leader, who was left with only one high-grade god, fled back to the Xiai divine dynasty's capital like a madman. This incident caused a commotion in the entire divine dynasty. As soon as the high-grade god returned to the divine dynasty and reported what had happened, his body exploded. There was actually a black ball growing inside his body. When the ball exploded, a terrible creature appeared in the Xiai divine dynasty's court, frantically rushing toward the divine emperor, who was sitting on the throne. However, it was crushed to death by the divine emperor with one finger. The divine emperor's face was full of worry because this was not good news. Meanwhile, the army exploring the ancient heaven god's relic also reported back. There were many experts in the ancient heaven god's relic, and most of them were god kings. So, they had not been wiped out by the horrible creature. However, they were not optimistic. This was because quite a number of god kings had already fallen, the kind where not even their corpses were left. 3 divine dynasties had 3 ancient heaven gods' relic. The moment the news appeared, the divine emperor immediately sent a message to the divine emperors of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty. Then, the divine emperors of the 2 divine dynasties said that they had not found such a creature in their territories. Moreover, the 2 divine dynasties had sent emissaries here. The appearance of these emissaries infuriated the divine emperor of the Xiai divine dynasty. In name, they were here to help the Xiai divine dynasty, but in fact, they were here to monitor the situation there. The divine emperor was in his twilight years, and the Xiai divine dynasty was facing a crisis of such a creature. How could the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty not be tempted? Year 13,600 of the Xiai calendar. The emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty entered the capital. That day, dawn had just broken. Bufang opened the restaurant's door. Chapter 1489. Bufang opened the door as usual. It was already dawn. The sun shone down from the sky, exuding a warm and comfortable feeling. It was a wonderful feeling. The first ray of sunshine in the morning always made people feel infinitely better. Bufang was in good mood. He was ready to start the day's cooking. Today should be another peaceful day. In fact, Bufang quite liked the slow-paced life in the divine dynasty. He felt that everything had become very warm. Outside the door, the crown prince came with disheveled hair, his face extremely serious. In fact, he had long since become familiar with the process of working as a waiter in a restaurant. After changing into his uniform at the door, he slowly stepped into the restaurant. Because it was early in the morning, there were few customers in the restaurant, and many people had not arrived for dinner yet. Therefore, the crown prince seemed a little idle. As time went by, the sun gradually rose, and the restaurant's business gradually boomed. Diners swarmed into the restaurant, and the atmosphere became lively. The diners ordered dishes. The crown prince reported the names of the dishes to Bufang, and Bufang cooked them. Everything was carried out in an orderly manner. The divine dynasty's capital was extremely lively. One after another, warships streaked across the sky and landed on the square with a gust of air gushing out of them. In the square, many high-ranking officials of the Xiai divine dynasty were ready to greet them. The style of these warships was completely different from that of the Xiai divine dynasty. They were from the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty. These 2 divine dynasties were on par with the Xiai divine dynasty in the chaotic universe, and their national strength was prosperous and extremely fearsome. Of course, like the Shai divine dynasty, these divine dynasties also had countless great worlds. This time, it was the emissary groups from the two great worlds who came. They had come to the Shai divine dynasty for an exchange. In fact, the Shai divine emperor did not have a good attitude toward these emissaries. The main reason was that he knew very well that these emissaries were here to find out the situation in the Shai divine dynasty. After all, how could the other two divine dynasties not know that the divine emperor's time was coming to an end? The fall of a god emperor would have a huge impact on the structure of the chaotic universe. That was why the two divine dynasties had sent emissaries to learn about the divine emperor's condition as soon as possible. Of course, they also wanted to inquire about the strange creature that had frightened the people of the Shai divine dynasty. Even though they knew that these emissaries came with ill intentions, the high-ranking officials of the Shai divine dynasty still followed the divine emperor's decree and warmly received them. Boom! With his hands clasped behind his back, King Pingyong stood in the square with many high-ranking officials. In the sky, battleships slowly flew over. A brief moment later, the warship descended and the cabin door opened. Experts that were as ethereal as immortals walked out. They were the people of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. They were dozens of geniuses carefully selected by the immortal spirit divine dynasty. There were countless great worlds in the immortal spirit divine dynasty, and these geniuses were selected from these great worlds. Everyone's strength had been tested. An incomparably talented, monstrous genius. For the Shai divine dynasty, this was not good news. After all, since the immortal spirit divine dynasty had sent these geniuses here, it meant that the Shai divine dynasty needed to protect them well. Otherwise, once these geniuses were in danger, the immortal spirit divine dynasty would have an excuse to attack the Shai divine dynasty. This situation was not allowed to happen in the Shai divine dynasty, which was in a precarious situation. Therefore, the high-ranking officials and experts of the Shai divine dynasty needed to receive these experts well. However, the two divine dynasties would not be stupid enough to let so many geniuses come to the Shai divine dynasty. Naturally, they also sent experts to follow them. Finally, the ones who came out of the warships were the experts who were responsible for protecting the geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. They were a high-grade god king and several mid-grade god kings. The high-grade god king looked like an old man, but he was not the kind of old man who had one foot in the grave. His clothes were meticulously dressed, and his hair was neatly combed. He stood where he was like a straight spear. King Pingyong and the others met these emissaries. The two sides talked and laughed, and they reached a friendly consensus. After that, the geniuses of the Titan divine dynasty slowly appeared. One bare-chested expert after another walked out of the Titan divine dynasty's warship. The geniuses of the Titan divine dynasty were all naked, and their bodies were covered with strange patterns. They looked like barbarians, and in fact, their customs were also inclined to the barbaric style. The weapons in their hands were all made of bones, which were somewhat similar to the heaven god bones of the Lord Go. Like the immortal spirit divine dynasty, the experts who came were all geniuses of the divine dynasty, and they were guarded by a high-grade god king and many mid-grade god kings. After the three sides had a friendly exchange, the emissaries entered the divine dynasty's capital and settled down there. Undercurrents were surging in the various aristocratic families, and they all visited and befriended these geniuses of the divine dynasty. As time went by, these monstrous geniuses became restless in the imperial capital. These monstrous geniuses were all proud and arrogant people. Their strength was powerful, and they surpassed all levels. In the capital, they challenged the younger generation of the Shai divine dynasty. Many heirs of the aristocratic families and kings couldn't escape the challenge. The geniuses of the Shai divine dynasty were also proud. Naturally, they wouldn't refuse. After a few challenges, however, they ended up with a shocking result. The geniuses of the Shai divine dynasty were all defeated, This was simply unacceptable to the Xiai divine dynasty. The heirs of the aristocratic families were also dumbfounded and lost. This battle had completely made the geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty go wild. The Titan divine dynasty and the immortal spirit divine dynasty even made bets while talking and laughing, competing on winning streaks. They didn't take the geniuses of the Xiai divine dynasty seriously at all. The whole Xiai divine dynasty was enveloped in a foul atmosphere. Not only did the divine emperor not stop the situation, but he also didn't intervene. He seemed to have the idea of training the younger generation of the divine dynasty. This made the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty even more wild. Bam! A figure fell from the sky and smashed down hard. The Zhao family's skyscraper. Zhao Wuhan smashed hard into the square in front of the skyscraper. An uproar broke out around the square, and all the onlookers fell silent. The heir of the Zhao family was also defeated. In the sky, an ethereal man who looked like an immortal smiled faintly. He was holding a sword and dressed in a white veil. His face was extremely handsome, and he looked like a peerless sword immortal, ethereal and otherworldly. Many women in the surroundings were attracted by this man. He's too strong. The young marquis of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, Feng Wuji, defeated Zhao Wuhan in 10 moves. They're not on the same level at all. Although they're both exceptional demigods, I estimate that Feng Wuji is at the level of a young master. A young master? What a joke. Yesterday, Feng Wuji cut off the crown of King Tianlong's son with a sword. A young master like him is no match for Feng Wuji. Murmurs rang out in the surroundings. The immortal-like man in the sky smiled faintly. He flicked his finger. The sword buzzed, soared into the sky, and returned to its sheath. His sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes shone with melancholy, causing countless girls to scream. I'm a little disappointed. Are the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty so weak? Feng Wuji clasped his hands behind his back, a touch of melancholy on his face. Brother Wuji, it's time to go. The next opponent is Luo Hui of the Luo family. I heard he's a genius who comprehended the supreme law of the universe. He's enough for you to fight and extend your streak of 15 consecutive victories, said a woman with picturesque features. Down below, a woman with a picturesque appearance and fine black hair that flowed down like a waterfall spoke softly, and she wore an ancient-style dress. She was exuding an immortal aura. Many people were intoxicated by the immortal aura. This Luo Hui does have some ability. I heard that Tai Tu of the Titan Divine Dynasty was defeated by him. Feng Wuji landed. He completely ignored Zhao Wuhan, who was lying on the ground with a dull look in his eyes. In his eyes, a loser was not worthy of his attention. The surrounding experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty sneered as they looked at Zhao Wuhan, who was lying in the ruins. The heir of the Zhao family is just SOSO. The people of the immortal spirit divine dynasty hurried toward the Luo family's residence. Zhao Wuhan got up from the ground and sighed. He was defeated in 10 moves. Feng Wuji was really strong. The latter did not comprehend the supreme law of the universe and only relied on his sword intent. However, it was fused with dozens of ordinary laws, and the power of his sword energy was comparable to that of a god king. Before the sword intent, Zhao Wuhan's law of devour was like paper. Although Luo Hui was strong, he might not be able to stop it. Zhao Wuhan felt a little frustrated. Almost all the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty was going to be defeated. Was there really no one who could stop these fellows? This was a matter of national humiliation. Even some of the young masters who had broken through to the god realm were no match for these geniuses. Why was the gap between them so big? Zhao Wuhan was a little confused. In the Luo family, the battle did not last long. Soon it came to an end. Luo Sanyang looked in disbelief at the scene in the distance. Her genius brother was actually forced to his knees by a man from the immortal spirit divine dynasty with one sword strike. How was that possible? Luo Hui had comprehended the supreme law of the universe. In the Luo family's residence, the ground was cracked. Luo Hui's hair was disheveled as he knelt on the ground in a daze. With his body as the center, the ground around him was covered in dense sword qi. The sword qi was filled with the terrifying power of laws. If Feng Wuji hadn't held back, he might have been killed by the sword strike. Is Feng Wuji, the young marquis, so strong? Luo Hui raised his head numbly and glanced at Feng Wuji in the distance. Brother Luo Hui, your strength is not bad. It's a pity that your foundation is not solid enough. I heard that you are the best of a younger generation in the Xiai divine dynasty, but I'm a little disappointed. Feng Wuji sighed, wiped his sword with a light gauze, and sighed. Luo Hui's face was unsightly. Luo Sanyang clenched her fists, wishing she could punch this guy. He's too pretentious. Does he really think no one in the Xiai divine dynasty can stop them? If it weren't for the fact that she was no match for Feng Wuji, she would have attacked him directly. The Crown Prince and young Master Ping Yang haven't made a move yet. If they do, you won't be able to win at all, Luo Hui said as he stood up from the ground, his face slightly pale. Naturally, his momentum could not be weak. Oh, the Crown Prince and young Master Ping Yang. I heard that these two are the top existences of the younger generation. Feng Wuji stopped wiping his sword. Wrong, they're not the top existences. The top one. Hee. Luo Sanyang said with a sneer in the distance. Feng Wuji glanced at her and breathed out a mouthful of sword energy. Then, with his hands clasped behind his back, he drifted into the distance. No matter what, Feng Wuji, have won this battle and extended my 15th winning streak. As for the Crown Prince and young Master Ping Yang, I will challenge them myself. I hope they won't disappoint me too much. The geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty drifted away. The group of people left into the distance and disappeared in a short while. Luo Hui's face was pale. Tai Fei of the Titan divine dynasty has won 15 consecutive victories, and so has Feng Wuji. Our Xiai divine dynasty has really lost face this time. Luo Sanyang sighed as well. I hope the Crown Prince and the others can stop these guys' winning streaks. After learning about the Xiai divine dynasty's current situation, the two relatively gentle divine dynasties finally revealed their ferocious claws and fangs. It's time for young Master Ping Yang to come out of seclusion. Otherwise, these guys will soon enter the ancient heaven god's relic. At that time, these disgraces will never be washed away. As for the Crown Prince, alas, Luo Hui sighed with emotion. After being honed in Bu Feng's restaurant, the Crown Prince had long lost his edge. He was no longer the genius Crown Prince who no one dared to look at when he was in high spirits. Without his edge, a genius would no longer be considered a genius. However, Luo Hui thought of the man in the restaurant the Crown Prince served. His body trembled slightly, and he wished that man could make a move. In terms of showing off, even 10 Feng Wujis would not be his match. In the Luo family's skyscraper, in the restaurant on the top floor, Bu Feng was lying leisurely in a rocking chair, basking in the warm sun. Hades Era, on the other hand, was chatting with Luo Sanyang's best friends in the restaurant with a spicy strip dangling from his mouth. The Crown Prince sat in the restaurant with a dark face. There were no customers now, so he looked a little leisurely. However, he was really fed up with the guy in the distance who kept bragging with a spicy strip dangling from his mouth. Isn't he just comprehending an incomplete law of life? Does he really think he's the god of life? Ridiculous. The Crown Prince breathed a sigh of relief. Then he closed his eyes slightly. Suddenly, the Crown Prince opened his eyes, focused his gaze, and looked outside the door of the restaurant. Over there, a group of people walked slowly toward the restaurant. The leader was a handsome man shrouded in immortal energy and looked like a banished immortal. He carried a sword on his back. Although he looked gentle, his aura was overbearing. The man glanced outside the restaurant. Then he stepped into the restaurant. The menu is behind you. Tell me what you want to eat. The Crown Prince said with a straight face. This, However, as soon as the crown prince's voice rang out, the man carrying the sword sneered. The crown prince? The crown prince of the Shai divine dynasty is actually a waiter? No wonder the younger generation of the Shai divine dynasty is as weak as dogs. Chapter 1490. The Crown Prince? No wonder the younger generation of the Shai divine dynasty is as weak as a dog. A faint sneer filled with disdain resounded. The Crown Prince, sitting in a chair, froze. He slowly raised his head and looked sharply at the man standing in front of the restaurant. What did this guy say? Under the Pathfinder standing tree, Lord Dog slowly opened his eyes. His eyes opened a slit, and a bright light shot out from his eyes. I heard that someone said a dog is weak. Who did a dog offend? Fong Wuji looked at the Crown Prince, not hiding the disappointment on his face. He had sent someone to investigate, and to his surprise, he learned that the Crown Prince of the Shai divine dynasty was working as a waiter in a restaurant. The Crown Prince was working as a waiter? Was this a joke? The Crown Prince's status was high, and yet he was working as a waiter in a barren restaurant? How ridiculous! At the thought of this, Fong Wuji felt that this so-called Crown Prince was no threat at all. As an expert, he naturally had to have the dignity of an expert. Working as a waiter was tantamount to abandoning one's sharp and aggressive heart. Such a crown prince was nothing to be afraid of. The figure of the immortal spirit divine, dynasty's crown prince, emerged in Fong Wuji's mind. That crown prince was the real top genius of the chaotic universe. In the demigod realm, he had not only comprehended the supreme laws of the universe, but also comprehended nearly 200 ordinary laws, which was close to the level of a mid-grade god king. In terms of realm and strength, he could be called the #1 genius. It was said that the current crown prince of the Shai divine dynasty was the strongest genius, but after seeing him with his own eyes, he realized that his reputation was undeserved. How could a waiter be called the strongest genius? Ridiculous. Fong Wuji and the many experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty stepped into the restaurant. They found seats and sat down. They glanced around the restaurant. It was an ordinary restaurant with a good location. However, this was not the reason for the crown prince to come here. It was said that the crown prince was defeated by the chef of this restaurant. So he came here. As the crown prince, he was defeated by a chef. A chef's major must be the culinary path. How much could the culinary path add to one's fighting strength? It was a great humiliation for the crown prince to be defeated by a chef. Fong Wuji sat on the chair with a faint sneer on his face. In the distance, Hades Era held a spicy strip in his mouth. He stopped bragging to Luo Sanyang's close friends and narrowed his eyes at Fong Wuji. This guy was very handsome and cool. As soon as they entered the restaurant, they seemed to steal away a lot of Hades Era's limelight. How could this be tolerated? Hades Era glanced at DZ. DZ was provoking little DZ, and little DZ definitely wouldn't be able to tolerate it. When they started fighting, there would be a good show to watch. Bufong Young Man's restaurant has been too ordinary these days. It's not interesting at all. Hades Era felt a little tired after bragging to girls all day long. Waiter, come here to order. Fong Wuji smiled and glanced at the crown prince. Aren't you a waiter? Then I'll let you serve me well. With the crown prince of the Shai divine dynasty as a waiter, he could brag about it for a whole year when he returned. It just so happened that he could make the younger generation of the Shai divine dynasty lose face. Didn't those stubborn youngsters of the Shai divine dynasty place their hopes on their crown prince? Then let them have a good look at how the crown prince grovels in front of them. The corners of Fong Wuji's mouth curved upward, and he felt a surge of pleasure in his heart. Come, everyone sit down. Let's have a good experience of the crown prince's service. Ha ha ha. Fong Wuji burst out laughing. The surrounding experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty laughed as well. The beautiful woman's long eyelashes fluttered. She glanced at the crown prince, covered her mouth, and chuckled. She looked quite charming. The crown prince raised his eyebrows. Oh, this guy is arrogant, isn't he? Although the crown prince stayed in Bufong's restaurant, he was, after all, the crown prince. But he was, After all, the crown prince, and he had heard about everything that had happened in the Divine Dynasty. The emissaries of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty had challenged the younger generation of the Xiai Divine Dynasty. They had completely crushed the younger generation of the Xiai Divine Dynasty. At first, the crown prince didn't take it seriously, but now it seemed that the other party was really too arrogant. He even dared to show off in front of him. Who gave him the courage to do so? He only worked as a waiter to cultivate his moral character. Otherwise, with his hot temper, he would have killed this guy in seconds. The crown prince narrowed his eyes and stood where he was. He didn't move. Feng Wuji frowned. The next moment, his divine sense surged. The sharp sword on his back was unsheathed in an instant. A clanging sound rang out. In an instant, the restaurant was filled with sword light. Feng Wuji's sword was pressed against the crown prince's throat. Come on, give me a chance to defeat you fair and square. Otherwise, I won't feel any sense of accomplishment after defeating the crown prince, and I'll be very disappointed. Feng Wuji sneered. The geniuses of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty also laughed. Looking at the long sword at his throat, the crown prince smiled. Interesting. How dare he fight in the restaurant? Newborn calves are really fearless. The crown prince reached out a hand and gently flicked his finger on the tip of Feng Wuji's sword. With a ding, a buzzing sound rang out, and the restaurant began to tremble. Feng Wuji's eyes narrowed, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. A terrible sword intent erupted at this moment. If you don't answer, I'll take it as a yes, Feng Wuji said. The next moment, his aura suddenly erupted. The crown prince looked at Feng Wuji as if he were looking at a fool. As Feng Wuji's aura erupted, the restaurant and the kitchen also seemed to sense something. Ting-a-ling. The curtain was lifted. Then, Bufong walked out of the restaurant and shook the water off his hands. He glanced indifferently at Feng Wuji, who was holding a sword against the crown prince's throat. He twitched the corner of his mouth. When the crown prince saw Bufong, he raised his hands and took a step back to show that he had done nothing. Buzz, in the kitchen, a rumble suddenly rang out, and then a figure shot out in an instant. Feng Wuji's face froze. Not only him, but a group of people from the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty also turned to look. Outside the restaurant, a group of people had already gathered. They were all onlookers who had been attracted by Feng Wuji and the others. Some were the heirs of aristocratic families who had been defeated, and some were young masters. They looked at the scene in the restaurant with complicated expressions. Is a crown prince so scared that he doesn't dare to speak? Alas, when had the Xiai Divine Dynasty ever suffered such humiliation? Rumble. A palm the size of a cattail leaf fan slammed toward Feng Wuji's head. Feng Wuji's mind instantly became vigilant. A sword swept out, and a dazzling sword light burst out. It flew toward the palm. What's that? Feng Wuji said coldly. How dare you sneak attack me? You're courting death. A clanging sound rang out. Feng Wuji only felt a huge force erupt. He stood up from his seat and took a step back. His expression changed slightly. There a figure gradually emerged. It turned out to be a chubby and somewhat adorable iron puppet. When the crown prince saw Xiao Bai, the corners of his mouth curved upward. Troublemaker, you will be stripped as an example to others. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed as he looked at Feng Wuji. Stripped? The experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty were stunned, and then they sneered. With Feng Wuji here, who would dare to strip them? Besides, they were members of the emissary group of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. Who would dare to strip them? Weren't they afraid of being punished? How could the current Xiai Divine Dynasty dare to offend the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty? If the Divine Emperor of the Xiai Divine Dynasty was in his heyday, they might restrain themselves a little, but the Divine Emperor's life was coming to an end. What were they afraid of? In the chaotic universe, experts were the rules. Even if one wanted to strip someone, one must have the strength to do so. A mere iron puppet dared to say such a thing? Feng Wuji sneered as well. His sword was hungry and thirsty. Although his opponent was just a puppet, he still felt a rare sense of excitement. That's right, this lump of metal puppet might be a formidable opponent for him. He might be able to fight to his heart's content. It had been a long time since he had fought to his heart's content. Come on, let's fight. With a sword in hand, the world is mine. The corners of Fong Wuji's mouth curved into a smile. The next moment, he took a step forward and shot forward like a dragon. Roar. His sword was like a dragon's roar. In the distance, a look of sympathy came over the crown prince's face. Isn't it better to wear clothes? He murmured in his heart. With a spicy strip dangling from his mouth, Hades Era rubbed his hands excitedly, his eyes shining brightly. Behind Era, the group of girlfriends all widened their eyes like wolves. They seemed to be able to enjoy the beautiful scenery again. Bu Fong shook his head speechlessly. Xiao Bai was a professional at stripping clothes. His sword energy was like a dragon. Fong Wuji's cultivation base was indeed formidable. As soon as he thrust his sword, it turned into thousands of sword lights that kept bursting out in the restaurant. The sword went straight toward Xiao Bai. As for the crown prince, he had long been ignored by Fong Wuji. This crown prince is nothing to worry about. I'll deal with him after I get rid of this puppet. His winning streak couldn't stop like this. After all, he was going to compete with Tai Fei. Rumble. Facing Fong Wuji's sword, Xiao Bai, on the other hand, calmly threw out a palm. The sword and the palm collided. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were very excited. They felt that they would soon be able to see this iron puppet being cut into pieces. Bam! The fan-like hand was like a huge dragon charging forward, shattering the sword chi and directly grabbing Fong Wuji's head. Rip! A crisp sound of clothes being torn rang out. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed as he gently tossed his hand up. The corner of the crown prince's mouth curled up. The spicy strip in Hades Era's mouth trembled. The eyes of the girls in the group of girlfriends suddenly lit up. The geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were shocked. F*CK. A figure flew out of the restaurant. What was flying in the air was a torn piece of silk and gauze. A white figure was thrown out of the air, drew a beautiful arc in the air, and fell to the ground outside the restaurant. Fong Wuji was a little confused. He felt a chill all over his body. What happened? What is he doing? Where is he? Fong Wuji got up from the ground. His pupils constricted, and when he looked down, he saw that he was naked from head to toe. Fong Wuji, who had won 15 matches in a row, was actually stripped naked. Behind Hades Era, the women in the group of girlfriends looked at Fong Wuji's body and suddenly sighed, their faces revealing a dull expression. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were also in disbelief. Then, they all lowered their heads and whispered to each other. A blush appeared on the face of that indescribably beautiful woman, making her even more beautiful and moving. She spat to herself and called him a hooligan. Fong Wuji's ears were ringing, and he felt dizzy. The next moment, he came to his senses. It was as if he was about to explode. Damn it! Damn it! What kind of lousy restaurant is this? Break it with one sword strike. Fong Wuji was furious. He was embarrassed in front of his goddess, stripped naked, and his secrets were exposed. For him, this was a great humiliation. Rumble. All the power of the law spread. A terrible sword intent swept across the place, rolling and surging. In the restaurant, the crown prince's eyes flashed, and a cold glint swept out. You're courting death. The crown prince unbuttoned a button on his uniform. He was about to go out of the restaurant and strike. However, as soon as he unbuttoned it, he was stopped by Bu Fong. It's business time. Calm down. Don't take off your clothes so easily, Bu Fong said. The crown prince froze. So the point is to take off my clothes. Era, 5 spicy strips. I'll leave that swordsman to you. I'll give you 2 hours to teach him a lesson, Bu Fong said, playing with his fingers. He looked expressionlessly at Era, who was holding a spicy strip in his mouth. 2 hours? Are you looking down on I? Please give I an hour. I will teach him how to teach him a lesson. Chapter 1491. Give I half an hour, and I will definitely kill him. Hades Era said with a spicy strip in his mouth. The crown prince was speechless. The women in the group of girlfriends screamed. Was their Prince Charming finally going to show his skills? In their eyes, their god of life was even more majestic and valiant than the crown prince. Boom! You're courting death. Feng Wuji was cold and ruthless. After flying into a rage out of humiliation, he exploded. His sword was the all-things sword. His way of a sword was to wipe out everything that stood in his way. The crown prince stopped attacking. Strictly speaking, he should be the one to attack. However, since Bufong wanted Hades Era to attack, he would just wait and see. If it didn't work out, he would make his move. With the spicy strip in his mouth, Hades Era slowly walked out. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hades Era stood in front of the restaurant. His terrible sword intent was surging, and countless streams of sword energy were swirling, turning into a huge sword that stretched across the sky. The sword slashed toward the restaurant. At the top of the Luo family's building, it seemed to cut the whole building in half. Hades Era stood still, his eyes flashing. Then his body shot up into the sky like a spring. He didn't dodge, colliding with the sword energy. Ah! A groan rang out. Hades Era, who had shot up into the sky, was hit by the sword, and his body fell to the ground. The ground shook. Everyone was shocked. One sword strike? Feng Wuji was stunned. He thought Hades Era was strong. Didn't he say that he would compete with him in swordsmanship? How could he be defeated by one sword strike? The women in the group of girlfriends widened their eyes and came to an abrupt stop. The cheers in their mouths were only halfway through. He was defeated just like that? Didn't he say that he would last for half an hour? The crown prince rubbed his face speechlessly. Sure enough, that guy was here to make fun of him. What kind of trash is this? How dare you provoke me? Feng Wuji floated in the sky and sneered. He had 3 swords, but he had only used the first one, and that bastard could not even take it. Yet, he still dared to say that he could defeat him in an hour. It was simply ridiculous. Had the Xia Divine dynasty been reduced to relying on these grandstanding fellows to keep up appearances? Voila, suddenly, rubble rolled down from the roof of the building. A figure stood up from the ruins. Hades Era flipped his hair and tidied it up. I wasn't ready, so I'll let you stab me again, Era said. He bent his body slightly and stomped on the ground. Bang! Hades Era soared into the sky again. I have a slut. Please enlighten me. Era roared. Feng Wuji's eyes narrowed. To be able to take a strike from him and remain unscathed, this person must be extraordinary. The surrounding people were also in an uproar. He could still fight. This was out of everyone's expectations. Interesting. With his hands clasped behind his back, the crown prince looked at the battle in the sky with a look of interest. Feng Wuji dared not to be careless. Sword intent swept out from all over him. A sword that breaks mountains and rivers. Feng Wuji's pupils constricted. His sword intent gathered on his sword and swept it out. A clanging sound rang out as the sword went out, destroying heaven and earth. Slash! The sword slashed down. The power of this strike was extremely fearsome. Luo Hui was defeated by this strike. Rumble! The whole Luo family skyscraper seemed to be shaking. The violent shaking made the hearts of all present tremble slightly. The void exploded. Turbulence kept flowing under the sword. There was no doubt that the power of Feng Wuji's strike had reached at least the level of a perfected god. After all, he was a genius demigod of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. The power of his strike was extremely terrifying. Swoosh! Up in the sky, a figure was sent flying backward. With a thud, he smashed into the ground. Ah! Another round of screams rang out. Nether King Air crawled up from the ground one more time. He rubbed his chest, holding the spicy strip in his mouth. Haven't you eaten? Please use more strength. Eris said. The surrounding people were dumbfounded. Even the crown prince was stunned. This guy is so resistant. Does the law of life have such an effect? Is this how the law of life is used? Feng Wuji's face twitched, and his eyes grew more and more serious. He's still unscathed. This is unbelievable. Again, Fong Wuji was infuriated. He didn't believe that his sword couldn't hurt this guy. A sword fell from the sky. Buzz, a misty sword light blotted out the sky. The power of this strike became more and more terrifying. Hades' Era stood where he was. His hair fluttered in the wind, and his aura grew stronger and stronger. Then, the law of life spread. Shao Chun leaped high into the air like a star, radiating an aura of life from the inside out, looking extremely resplendent. Boom! Fong Wuji's sword swept out. Instantly, it was like a moving galaxy. Tens of thousands of sword lights descended, smashing on Nether King Erha's body. Erha let out a groan as his body was constantly bombarded. However, under the healing of the law of life, he was unscathed. "Hit me," Hades' Era said, staring at Fong Wuji. "Haven't you eaten? Use more strength." Hades' Era seemed to be roaring with the law of life. Fong Wuji's mind trembled, and his hand holding the sword seemed to be unstable. Is this guy so fierce? Swish, swish, swish. Fong Wuji raised his sword again. Countless sword lights slashed down in the void. The void shattered inch by inch. A terrible aura of destruction swept out, filling heaven and earth. In a flash, Hades' Era was enveloped by the destructive sword energy. Fong Wuji took a deep breath. This sword could be considered as his strongest sword move. Buzz, the sword light dissipated. Hades' Era's body was covered with sword marks, and blood seemed to be splashing from the wounds. However, the wounds were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Hit me. Use more strength. Your sword is my bitch." Nether King Erha roared. His eyes widened as he let out a roar. His eyes were bloodshot. The power of law above his head kept swirling. This guy is so tough. Even Fong Wuji's law of sword path can't completely kill this guy with one strike. Also, this guy really deserves a beating. Fong Wuji seemed to have a psychological shadow and began to doubt his life. Every time he thought he was going to hack this guy to death, he would still stand up energetically. It happened again and again, and Fong Wuji was a little scared. His sword intent, which could suppress the heirs of aristocratic families with one strike, couldn't kill this guy in front of him. The law of life. Fong Wuji sucked in a cold breath when he sensed Nether King Erha's power of law. The law of life was a law that only the Empress of the immortal spirit divine dynasty comprehended. Once the Empress's law appeared, a dead great world could be revived in an instant. This guy in front of him had also mastered the law of life. But since when could the law of life make its possessor immortal? No matter how hard he attacked, he couldn't kill this guy. How could he fight? His hand, which was holding the sword, was shaking. Hades' Era approached step by step. Finally, he was in front of Fong Wuji. "I have a big spicy strip." As he approached Fong Wuji, Nether King Erha instantly tore his throat, letting out a loud roar. "Fong Wuji? What is this guy shouting about?" Fong Wuji's pupils constricted. Then he found that a huge, black, brick-like object had appeared in Hades' Era's hand. Is this the so-called big spicy strip? Fong Wuji froze. Then he realized that the pitch-black, brick-like spicy strip was smashing toward his head. With a loud bang, the black chili strip smashed into Fong Wuji's head with a crushing force. Bam! Fong Wuji suddenly felt dizzy, and his body was forcefully smashed down from the sky. He hit the ground hard. A rumbling sound rang out. The ground caved in. The onlookers were dumbfounded. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were dumbfounded. Fong Wuji was knocked down. He was smashed down by a brick. No, a spicy strip. It was supposed to be a fierce battle, but why did it become so strange and funny? What the hell was a big spicy strip? In midair, the clothes on Nether King Erha's body were torn by the sword energy, turning into strips of cloth. Erha grabbed the clothes in front of him with both hands, and with a ripping sound, he tore them apart. A man with spicy strips is mighty and majestic. Hades' Era roared in midair. The onlookers were speechless. Bufong was speechless. Rumble on the ground, smoke and dust billowed away. Fong Wuji stood where he was, holding his sword. He felt a little dizzy. That spicy strip was a divine artifact. The power of one blow was so terrifying. Suddenly, Fong Wuji raised his head. Above his head, a black that was getting bigger and bigger in his hazy vision. The next moment, Era descended from the sky with the spicy strip in his hand. The chilly strip, which was wrapped in a terrifying force, ruthlessly smashed onto Fong Wuji's head. Bam! Time seemed to stand still at this moment. A crack rang out. The brick hit Fong Wuji's head and slowly broke into two halves. A stream of blood gushed out of Fong Wuji's forehead and slowly flowed down, blurring his vision. "I'm bleeding," Fong Wuji said blankly. Then, a violent dizziness came over him. Fong Wuji raised his sword and pointed it at Hades' Era. A clanging sound rang out. The sword fell to the ground. Fong Wuji fell to the ground. His divine sense stopped working, and he fainted. Fong Wuji, the genius demigod of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, the record holder of 15 consecutive victories, was defeated by a spicy strip. Hades' Era flipped his hair. Although the spicy strip he made could not be eaten, it was absolutely qualified as a weapon. He grimaced in pain for a while. Even with the law of life, Hades' Era still felt a stabbing pain in his body. He had suffered too much damage, and he needed time to digest it. He almost couldn't hold on any longer. It hurts so *king much. Eyes delicate skin. Hades' Era shivered for a while, then looked at the crown prince in the direction of the restaurant. "Little Emperor, it's your turn. Eyes' lowliness is your lowliness." Hades' Era returned to the restaurant, shivering. The crown prince rolled his eyes. Why did such a transcendent law of life turn into the law of rascals? What a waste of this precious law of life. I followed the wrong master. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty dashed out like crazy. They landed beside Fong Wuji. Blood dripped from Fong Wuji's forehead. Fortunately, he had only fainted, which made the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty breathe a sigh of relief. Fong Wuji, who had won 15 consecutive victories, was defeated. "Why do I feel a little unwilling to lose?" Bufong looked at Hades' Era, who was walking back into the restaurant. The corner of his mouth twitched involuntarily. He looked at the time. Bufong yawned and said to the crown prince, "Business hours are over. You're free to do whatever you want from now on." After that, he clasped his hands behind his back and went back into the kitchen. "Business hours are over?" The corner of the crown prince's mouth twitched slightly. He raised his hand and unbuttoned his uniform one by one. His eyes were cold as he stared at the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty outside the door. His hand shook. The void was torn apart. A golden dragon knife fell into his hand. The dragon's soul knife appeared, and a dragon roar soared into the sky. Holding the knife, the crown prince walked step by step toward the group of talented demigods of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. He glanced at the group of geniuses. The crown prince curved his lips disdainfully. "I've never been afraid of anyone except that stinking chef. All of you, come at me together." Chapter 1492. Hades' Era had defeated Fong Wuji. This news was a blow to those geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. Fong Wuji was not the strongest among them, but he was the most active. Among the emissaries who came here, Fong Wuji's strength could only rank second. As for the strongest, it was a prince of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. That prince did not like to participate in such fights. Therefore, now that Fong Wuji was defeated, it was basically difficult for them to get back at him. However, the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were unwilling to accept this. Because, to be honest, the person who defeated Fong Wuji didn't use actual strength to defeat Fong Wuji. The reason why Fong Wuji lost was that he was killed by AB*TCH. That was right. He was killed by AB*TCH. In terms of strength, Fong Wuji crushed that guy. However, After comprehending the law of life, that guy's resilience was too strong, and he killed Feng Wuji with a B***H. Therefore, the geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were a little aggrieved. Feng Wuji had fallen unconscious and was carried on their backs. How could they tolerate this? And now, the waiter of the restaurant was so arrogant that he asked them to attack him together. He was completely looking down on them. The crown prince looked indifferently at this group of people. There was a faint disdain on his face. He might have behaved obscenely in Bufong's restaurant, but that was because he knew very well how terrifying it was. Not to mention Xiao Bai, who was good at stripping clothes. Just the black dog lying under the path understanding tree was not something he dared to provoke. When the bones smashed him, the crown prince felt that he might doubt his life. However, he was, after all, the extremely arrogant crown prince. As the crown prince, he naturally had his own confidence and arrogance. The immortal spirit divine dynasty crushed the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty. The crown prince held the extreme emperor dragon soul blade in his hand as he walked forward step by step. His aura kept increasing, and with every step he took, his aura seemed to break through the clouds. It was extremely terrifying. Like climbing a stairway to heaven, the crown prince walked out of the restaurant. His aura climbed up the stairway and reached the clouds. The dragon soul knife had lost its dragon soul. However, in terms of quality, it was still a top divine artifact. Holding the knife, a terrible aura almost crushed all the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty present. A genius demigod from the immortal spirit divine dynasty narrowed his eyes. The crown prince of the Xiai divine dynasty, since Feng Wuji had fainted, then let him experience it for himself. Boom! The expert took a step forward, and his figure instantly rushed in front of the crown prince like a dragon. His body was as ethereal as an immortal. He stretched out his hand, intending to strike the crown prince's face. The arch held the dragon's saber with an expressionless face. He tilted his head slightly, looked at the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, and grinned. A sense of disdain burst forth from him. "Are you looking down on me?" the crown prince said. Grabbing the knife with one hand, the dragon knife swept out, and the knife light suddenly cut down. The expert of the immortal spirit divine dynasty let out a miserable howl, and the power of law in him did not even break out. He was sent flying and fell miserably on the ground. "How dare you challenge me when you haven't even comprehended a supreme law of the universe? Who gave you the courage?" The crown prince carried the dragon saber. He looked down from above and said indifferently. The expert whose palm had been cut off immediately let out a miserable howl. His palm had been cut off, and blood kept flowing. However, he was, after all, a demigod, and he could still recover his body. However, he still looked miserable at the moment. "Cutting off your palm is a lesson for you," the crown prince said lightly. He walked forward step by step. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were even more frightened, and they all retreated. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty felt even more frightened and retreated one after another. Feng Wuji grunted and woke up from his coma. As soon as he woke up, he let out a furious roar. He couldn't believe that he was knocked out by a spicy strip. It was a great humiliation for him to be knocked out by a spicy strip. How could he bear such a humiliation? That guy's fighting capacity was obviously much weaker than his. Boom! The sword on his back flew out with a buzzing sound like a drop of water. In the distance, the crown prince grinned and looked indifferently at Feng Wuji, who was soaring into the sky. It was this guy who shouted the loudest before. A beam of sword light fell from the sky. Then it rushed toward the crown prince. However, the immortal-like sword energy that filled the sky was torn apart. The crown prince's knife energy slashed out like a dragon, possessing the power to destroy heaven and earth. With one slash, it could destroy everything. Feng Wuji's expression changed. Holding the sword, Lin Fan leaped out from the void. The Crown Prince was not Hades' era. That guy had extraordinary resilience because he had comprehended the law of life. In terms of fighting capacity, Feng Wuji could kill him in seconds. However, the Crown Prince in front of him, Feng Wuji, felt the pressure. This was the first time he had felt pressure among his peers in the Xiai divine dynasty. This is the battle I want. Feng Wuji took a deep breath, his eyes full of fighting spirit. Rumble. In the distance, a warship came over from the void. Several figures walked out of the warship. The geniuses of the Titan Divine Dynasty also appeared. The Titan Divine Dynasty's experts were all bare-chested and looked extremely tough. Each of them looked as if they had walked out of the wilderness. Their leader, however, was a skinny teenager. His upper body was naked, and his lower body was wrapped in tiger skin. Carrying a bone axe on his back, he stared at the battle on the top of the Luo family skyscraper with clear eyes. The Titan Divine Dynasty's genius is here, too. That's Tai Fei, the one whose battle record is not weaker than Feng Wuji's. I heard that no one has forced him to use his axe so far. The people around them started to murmur. Everyone's face was filled with excitement. The appearance of the Titan Divine Dynasty's experts made the battle much more interesting and lively. The Xiai Divine Dynasty's Crown Prince? I wonder if he can force me to use my Titan Divine axe. With the bone axe on his back, Tai Fei smiled faintly. The battle between Feng Wuji and the Crown Prince broke out. Feng Wuji did not comprehend the supreme law of the universe, but he had comprehended dozens of laws, including some high-level laws. Moreover, all of them assisted him with the law of the sword path, which made his sword extremely powerful. Of course, it was a humiliation for him to be defeated by Hades' era. He could only wash away this humiliation with a victory. And the Crown Prince in front of him was the best choice. Rumble. He raised his sword. Thousands of sword beams pierced through the void and shot toward the Crown Prince. Facing Feng Wuji's attack, the Crown Prince did not dodge. However, the Crown Prince did not dodge Feng Wuji's attack at all. The void around the Crown Prince was twisting. Feng Wuji's sword beams were diverted to other places in the twisted void. When Feng Wuji's sword energy attacked the distorted void, it would be diverted to another place. The law of space, the law of space. In the distance, Tai Fei narrowed his eyes. They all knew that the Xiai Divine Dynasty's Crown Prince had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe. They also wanted to feel how strong an existence who had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe was. Bam! 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 The void exploded. Feng Wuji's figure floated out. Holding his sword, he was full of fighting spirit. Like a ghost, he kept disappearing, reappearing, disappearing, and reappearing. Every swing of his sword contained the power of dozens of laws, which made him very powerful. The power of his sword was also extremely strong. The Crown Prince's face was indifferent. Have you had enough fun? The Crown Prince twitched his mouth. If you have, then let's end this. Suddenly, the dragon knife buzzed. The next moment, a dazzling golden light burst out of it. Rumble. A crack spread out from the ground and rose from the ground. Bam! 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 One sword beam after another exploded in the void. Feng Wuji's expression changed dramatically. He found that the Crown Prince's knife had actually cut all his sword beams in half. So strong. With a flip of his hand, Feng Wuji threw out 10,000 swords at the same time. I only need one knife to defeat you, the Crown Prince said. The law of space and the law of destruction wrapped around the dragon knife. Bam! A saber shadow swept out and collided with Feng Wuji, who was in the void. It was like a collision of stars. A terrible rumble swept out in all directions. It's over. In the distance, Tai Fei said lightly. The pupils of the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty constricted. They saw Feng Wuji fly backward in midair, coughing up blood, and his face slightly pale. The sword in his hand had actually cracked open in this moment. He could suppress the heir of the Luo family with his sword, but in the face of the Crown Prince, It was almost broken. Is this the power of the Crown Prince? Feng Wuji fell into the void, his hand holding the sword trembling. A look of fear and dejection appeared on his face. Holding the dragon knife, the Crown Prince stood in midair. He breathed a sigh of relief. His face was indifferent. If it weren't for the disappearance of the dragon's soul in the knife would have been enough to cut Feng Wuji's sword in half. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were a little disappointed. Feng Wuji had been defeated twice in a row. This was undoubtedly a great blow to his temperament. It was a pity that the Crown Prince of the immortal spirit divine dynasty didn't make a move. Otherwise, he could still fight the Crown Prince. The experts of the Xiai divine dynasty, who were watching the battle in secret, all clenched their fists with excitement on their faces. Even though the Crown Prince had been defeated by Bu Feng. However, the Crown Prince was, after all, the Crown Prince. He had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, and his strength was outstanding among his peers. This battle could be considered as a way to vent the anger of the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty. It also ignited a flame in the Crown Prince's heart. Holding the dragon knife, he turned abruptly. His eyes shone like torches, his fighting spirit soared, and he went straight into the restaurant. However, the moment he turned in the distance in the direction where the geniuses of the Titan divine dynasty were, suddenly, a beam of light soared into the sky. A thin young man entered the restaurant, laughing. The Crown Prince of the Xiai divine dynasty. I'm Tai Fei of the Titan divine dynasty. Please enlighten me. His voice seemed to turn into a bestial roar, shaking heaven and earth. It sounded like thunder and the sky was roaring. The Crown Prince turned abruptly. A terrible aura kept pressing at him, blowing at his hair. Roar. The Titan divine dynasty was the most belligerent of the three divine dynasties. Their imperial family was the Titan divine clan. They were born with divine strength, and their strength was very terrifying. Tai Fei entered the restaurant. Suddenly, he grabbed the bone axe on his back. Then, he swung it down toward the Crown Prince. That axe looked ordinary, as if it did not contain any power. However, at that moment, the axe attracted everyone's attention. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air as they were attracted by this axe. The axe drew a beautiful arc in the air and slashed toward the Crown Prince's position. This was the first time Tai Fei had wielded an axe so far. The experts of the Xiai divine dynasty, the immortal spirit divine dynasty, and the Titan divine dynasty were all watching. Bu Feng pulled up a chair and sat at the entrance of the restaurant. He watched the battle with great interest. Then, he saw Tai Fei's axe slash toward the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince felt the pressure. Tai Fei's axe might look ordinary, but in fact, it contained the profound power of laws. But, in reality, it contained the profound power of laws. There were also many other laws. So many laws were combined together. It fell from the sky. It seemed to be splitting the sky. The Crown Prince sucked in a cold breath. The Crown Prince sucked in a cold breath. He turned around and unsheathed his saber, slashing at the axe that was falling down. As the Crown Prince, he was not afraid of the Titan barbarian. Bam! The bone axe collided with the dragon knife. Instantly, the sound of the collision shook heaven and earth. A figure was pushed back from the point of collision. Everyone sucked in a cold breath, because the one who was pushed back was the Crown Prince. In midair, a thin young man was holding a bone axe, his eyes bright like torches. There seemed to be a giant ape roaring behind him. Then, he cast his gaze straight toward the restaurant. He had defeated the Crown Prince with one axe strike. Tai Fei didn't seem satisfied. His target was Bu Feng, who was sitting in the shade in front of the restaurant. He raised his chin and smiled provocatively. Chapter 1493. Tai Fei was very proud. Perhaps this was the common failing of all geniuses. He knew that the Xiai divine dynasty's crown prince had been defeated by a chef, and this chef was undoubtedly the one sitting in the chair in front of him, watching the show. Since he could defeat the crown prince, he must have some tricks up his sleeve. Tai Fei was warlike, and he had perfectly inherited the warlike genes of the Titan gods. Since he was going to fight, he naturally wanted to fight all the geniuses of the Xia divine dynasty. The crown prince had been defeated, and he no longer took him seriously. So he set his eyes on Bu Fong. He wanted to fight this chef. The crown prince took a few steps back. His expression changed slightly. He had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, and with the dragon soul knife in hand, he couldn't withstand this guy's axe. The skin between his thumb and forefinger was torn, and blood was dripping from it. The crown prince's face was very serious. Tai Fei of the Titan divine dynasty is indeed a little fierce. Compared with Fong Wuji, Tai Fei was stronger because he had comprehended the supreme laws of the universe. More importantly, he was born with divine strength. Just like Fong Wuji, Tai Fei had comprehended many laws. The realm of a god was a realm in which one comprehended the laws, and the strength of one's strength was determined by how many laws one comprehended. Tai Fei's aura was ferocious, and a giant ape was roaring behind him. He had heard that the Titan gods had the bloodline of the divine ape. Now, it seemed that it was not a rumor. The crown prince of the Xia divine dynasty is just so. Tai Fei smiled faintly. Holding the axe, he ignored the crown prince and rested his provocative gaze on Bu Fong. The crown prince was nothing to fear, but Bu Fong, who could defeat him, had become his interest. He had come to the Xia divine dynasty to challenge all the geniuses there. He was already at the peak of the Titan divine dynasty, and apart from the crown prince, he was the strongest expert of the younger generation. He needed to seek a breakthrough, and the only way was to get enough pressure. He could feel that he was about to break through the limit of the demigod realm and become a god, and the only thing he lacked now was pressure. As long as the pressure was enough, he would be able to break through the limit. Sitting in front of the restaurant, Bu Fong was a little stunned. Is this guy provoking me? He was just a bystander. Bu Fong was speechless and pursed his lips. Since there was nothing to see, he would pack his things and go back to sleep. Bu Fong shrugged, stood up, picked up the chair, and walked into the restaurant. With a bang, he shut the restaurant's door tightly. Tai Fei's expression was slightly awkward. Was he being ignored? His provocative expression was already so obvious. Under normal circumstances, shouldn't this chef fight him for the dignity of an expert? Why didn't this chef play by the rules? Tai Fei looked at the crown prince, then at the restaurant. The crown prince shrugged expressionlessly. He felt somewhat anxious. Tai Fei was very strong, and even he, who had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, might not be able to defeat him. It was mainly because of Tai Fei's innate divine strength and the many laws he had comprehended. The crown prince exhaled deeply. No wonder his father said that there was always someone better. He had thought that Bu Fong was already an exception in this world. Now, it seemed that he was still a frog at the bottom of a well. The world was so big, and it was very possible for a few geniuses to emerge. He put away the dragon knife. The crown prince shook his head. Then he snapped his fingers. Immediately, a luxurious warship flew over. He got into it and left in front of everyone's eyes. Tai Fei froze in midair, holding the axe. Was I ignored again? The fight is not over yet. However, the crown prince had left. Tai Fei's target was now Bu Fong. The chef in this restaurant was his target. Since this chef had defeated the crown prince, as long as he defeated this chef, it would mean that he had suppressed all the geniuses of the Xia divine dynasty. At the thought of this, Tai Fei perked up. In that case, let's do it. Isn't he hiding in the restaurant? Then I'll smash this restaurant open. I don't believe this chef will always be a coward. Rumble. Tai Fei focused his eyes. The next moment, his aura began to climb. He grabbed the axe with both hands. Dark clouds seemed to be gathering in the sky. Buzz, the law of destruction, wrapped around his axe, and a terrible aura spread, shaking the void. The void in front of the axe kept cracking. What is he doing? Is he crazy? Does he want to open a restaurant? This is too much. After all, this is the capital of the Xia divine dynasty. How can he do whatever he wants? The surrounding experts were all stunned. Then, they all revealed sullen expressions. They never thought that Tai Fei would go to such extremes. Sure enough, the people of the Titan Divine Dynasty are a bunch of barbarians who only know how to fight. Such a move will surely attract the attention of the Shai Divine Dynasty's guards. Many people were watching closely. Rumble. In the sky, Black Armor frowned as he looked at the man standing in front of him. He was an expert of the Titan Divine Dynasty, a mid-grade god king. His aura was so strong that it seemed to be even stronger than his own. Your Excellency, you've gone too far. This is the Shai Divine Dynasty, not your Titan Divine Dynasty. You can't do whatever you want here, Black Armor said coldly. Behind him, many of the black-armored guards had drawn their weapons. A sharp aura filled the sky, and a clanging sound rang out incessantly. It seemed that a shocking collision was about to take place. It's just a small fight between the juniors. Don't be nervous, the Titan Divine Dynasty's mid-grade God King chuckled. However, he didn't dodge at all, which made Black Armor's face grow even more unsightly. A small fight? He's going to split a commercial building in the Shai Divine Dynasty's capital with one blow. For the Divine Dynasty, it will cause great panic and economic losses. Black Armor, naturally would not allow such a thing to happen. Down below, many experts felt a trace of strangeness. Up until now, the Divine Dynasty's guards had not shown up, which was somewhat intriguing. Tai Fei's eyes shone brightly. He let out a long roar. His aura reached its peak. It was as if a giant ape was holding an axe and hacking it down toward the restaurant, trying to split it in half. The terrible axe energy spread for 30,000 miles. If the axe hit the building would collapse, and the Divine Dynasty's capital would suffer a heavy loss. At this moment, everyone's expression changed. This is too much. The restaurant's door was closed. Tai Fei narrowed his eyes as he looked at the closed door. Then, he let out a long roar. "Come out," he bellowed. It sounded like the roar of a giant ape. Accompanied by the shadow of an axe, the terrible axe slashed down from the sky. "Cower? I'll make you cower." Tai Fei's eyes gleamed with a crazy smile. He was so crazy. This was the unique quality of the Titan Divine clan. Since you don't want to fight, you can die. Inside the restaurant, Bu Fong could sense the terrible blow coming from outside. He couldn't help but furrow his brows as if he was a little angry. The pressure from the opposite side made Bu Fong slightly angry. "Lord Go, let me borrow your bone." Bu Fong turned his eyes and rested them on Lord Go, who was sleeping soundly under the path understanding tree. Lord Go opened his sleepy eyes and froze slightly. He didn't seem to understand what Bu Fong was going to do. Then, he saw Bu Fong carrying the Heaven God's bone and opening the restaurant's door with a bang. This Bu Fong boy must be coveting Lord Go's Heaven God's bone. Lord Go rolled his eyes. The restaurant's door opened. Tai Fei's eyes shone brightly. He let out a long howl. The axe slashed down, trying to kill Bu Fong with one blow. He's out. He's really out. He has to come out, or the restaurant will be cut in half. The people of the Titan Divine Dynasty have gone too far. The experts of the Shai Divine Dynasty were a little indignant. However, they still widened their eyes and watched the battle in the restaurant. Bu Fong came out with a dog bone in his hand. Everyone's expression suddenly became very strange. A dog bone? Many people remember the scene when the dog smashed Black, who was close to a high-grade god king, to death with a dog bone in his hand. They immediately observed a moment of silence for Tai Fei. They had almost forgotten that there was a big shot in the restaurant. "A bone," Tai Fei sneered. "No matter what kind of bone you are, it's all trash under my Titan Divine axe. Die," Tai Fei roared. Holding the bone, Bu Fong rose into the sky step by step. He took his time. The shadow of the axe fell, blowing his hair and causing it to flutter unceasingly. Then, Bu Fong raised the bone and gently swept it out, colliding with the shadow of the axe. There was no terrible rumble, no clanging sound. There was only a creak that sounded like glass breaking. The axe, which seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth, slowly crumbled in front of the bone. Tai Fei froze. The experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty froze. So did the experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. Feng Wuji sucked in a cold breath. Is this chef really so strong? How is this possible? Tai Fei's pupils constricted as he came to his senses. I heard you were looking for me. An indifferent voice rang out. Tai Fei looked up and saw Bu Feng's expressionless face. He shuddered inexplicably. Fight! Tai Fei roared. Blue veins seemed to bulge on his naked upper body. However, in the face of Tai Fei's roar, Bu Feng raised the bone and smashed it down. Bam! Tai Fei let out a miserable howl. The defense that he was so proud of was completely shattered by this one bone. He hurriedly raised his hand to block it. Bam! However, another bone smashed down. Tai Fei's expression changed dramatically. Why did this bone ignore his defense? Bam! 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 Bu Feng's face was expressionless as he kept smashing the bone down. He looked like a parent who was teaching a child a lesson. Hit the legs. Hit the chest. Hit the buttocks. Shouted Bu Feng. Tai Fei instinctively tried to block, but every time he tried, he was hit by the bone. You. Tai Fei was furious. Why was there such a crushing defeat? He was the second strongest person among the younger generation of the Titan Divine Dynasty. He could not be defeated. Only the crown prince of the Titan Divine Dynasty could defeat him. I don't accept this, Tai Fei roared. Bam! The next moment, the bones smashed him in the face. Tai Fei was stunned. He covered his face with one hand, tears welling up in his eyes. His body was covered with black and blue bruises, and he looked very miserable. He was about to fight a fierce battle, so why was he being beaten like this? It was as if he was being chased and beaten by his father. I still don't accept this. Tai Fei bellowed, grabbing the axe and swinging it. Bam! The heaven god's bone hit his arm, causing him to feel pain. In the sky, like a stray dog, he was chased and beaten by Bu Feng with the heaven god's bone in his hand. Bu Feng was also surprised. This heaven god's bone is really a good thing. It feels so good to chase someone and beat them. In the sky, the expression of the mid-grade god king, who had stopped black armor, flickered. He looked down and saw Tai Fei, who was being chased like a dog. What's going on? The Titan Divine Dynasty's expert was dumbfounded. Tai Fei was a genius, but he was actually being beaten by a member of the younger generation. Behind him, Black Armor immediately wore a satisfied expression. He naturally recognized the heaven god's bone in Bu Feng's hand. It belonged to the genius Black Dog. He's indeed worthy of being the man his majesty values. He didn't bring shame to the Xiai Divine Dynasty. Tai Fei cried. He was really crying. Every time the bone hit him, he felt a pain that went deep into his bones. It made his nose sting, and he couldn't help crying. Stop! In the sky, the mid-grade god king of the Titan Divine Dynasty sped over. A terrible aura spread. The mid-grade god king locked onto Bu Feng. When his eyes fell on the bone in Bu Feng's hand, his pupils constricted. The next moment, greed exploded out of him. A heaven god's bone. It's actually a heaven god's bone. Chapter 1494. A heaven god's bone. Good heavens. It's actually a heaven god's bone. No wonder Tai Fei was being crushed. With a heaven god's bone, one could basically ignore the power of laws. Even if Tai Fei had the heaven god's divine power, he could not use it, unless he could completely crush it with great power. The mid-grade god king of the Titan Divine Dynasty showed a strong look of greed. He wanted to strike immediately and snatch the heaven god's bone. But he was not a fool. Even in the Titan Divine Dynasty's capital, he did not dare to snatch the heaven god's bone so blatantly. Even though the Xiai Divine Emperor was in his twilight years, he was not someone he could afford to offend. If the Divine Emperor wanted to kill him, he could do so with one finger. So, he put away his greed. However, he still glanced at the heaven god's bone in Bu Feng's hand from time to time. Even a god king would covet such a treasure. Tai Fei burst into tears, and his eyes were filled with deep sadness. He had never imagined that he would be crushed in such a manner. A heaven god's bone. This guy actually has a heaven god's bone. Since the mid-grade god king had made a move, Bufong stopped. Although he felt a little regretful, the feeling of fighting back was really good. The geniuses of the Titan Divine Dynasty and the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty were dumbfounded. Never had they imagined that this battle would actually end in such a comical manner. I must find a chance to snatch the heaven god's bone. The Titan Divine Dynasty's god king's eyes flashed, but he was calculating in his mind. Black armor arrived. The Titan Divine Dynasty's god king naturally would not do anything drastic. He took Tai Fei and the others and left the place. Of course, before he left, he gave Bufong and the restaurant a deep look. The people around the restaurant dispersed. Bufong returned to the restaurant with the bone in his hand, feeling like he hadn't had enough. He reluctantly returned the bone to the Lord Go. The Lord Go rolled his eyes. Sure enough, Bufong boy is really coveting the heaven god's bone in my hand. It's useless for you to covet it. Without the heaven god's bone's approval, you can't use its power. If you could, that little fellow would have exploded when you stabbed the bone just now, the Lord Go said. The Lord Go said. Bufong also understood that he could only satisfy his craving. After all, the heavenly god's bone belonged to the Lord Go. Lord Go carried the heavenly god's bone on his back again and yawned. Bufong boy, Lord Go, it's about time for me to return to the ruins. Back to the ruins? Bufong was taken aback. There are many good things in the ancient heaven god's ruins. Lord Go, I still need to go there. Lord Go suggests that you, kid, go there when you have the time. Lord Go continued to yawn, and the fat on his face trembled. Bufong muttered to himself. He really hadn't been to the ancient heavenly god's ruins, so he could give it a try. However, Bufong was afraid of trouble. It was more comfortable to bask in the sun in the restaurant. In addition, the creature who attacked us has also appeared in the ruins. I, Lord Go, must go and get revenge. I, Lord Go, have never suffered such a big loss in my life, except for the heavenly path. Lord Go's eyes narrowed, gleaming brightly. Bufong nodded. At the thought of that creature, his face grew serious. A creature that could make the divine emperor feel serious was naturally extraordinary, so he didn't dare to slight it. He had told the divine emperor about the creature's origin, but the divine emperor couldn't figure out what it was. It had destroyed a third-class, small world and even killed a god king in the ancient heaven god's ruins. This creature seemed to be growing more and more terrifying. The news of the heaven god's bone in the mysterious restaurant spread among the emissaries. Whether it was the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty or the Titan Divine Dynasty, they were all stimulated by the news. They couldn't wait to attack immediately. However, when they thought that this was the Shai Divine Dynasty, they restrained themselves a lot. However, all the emissaries seemed to be plotting something. Of course, they would not give up the heaven god's bone so easily. Such a lost piece of bone was like a huge, fragrant, steamed bun, attracting countless people. It should be noted that every divine dynasty had an ancient heaven god's relic. However, the number of heaven god's bones in them was limited. If they could get a piece of heaven god's bone from the Shai divine dynasty, it would be a big deal. For the other divine dynasties, it was a way to enhance their national strength. It was late at night. The long street was brightly lit. Outside the Luo family's skyscraper, there were several figures standing there. They were all experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty, and they coveted the heaven god's bone. Naturally, they would not let go of this opportunity. Since they couldn't do it in the open, they would do it in the dark. In any case, the Shai Divine Dynasty's divine emperor was in his twilight years. Even if he knew the news, he wouldn't dare to go to war with the Titan Divine Dynasty. The Titan Divine Dynasty was belligerent, and perhaps they had been looking forward to this battle for a long time. The mid-grade god of the Titan Divine Dynasty had a grave look on his face, and his eyes were bursting with greed. Keep a lookout for me outside the restaurant. If the Shai Divine Dynasty's guards appear, stop them immediately. It will only take a moment for me to escape. If they can't get hold of me, they won't be able to get the heaven god's bone back. The mid-grade god king said to the few god kings around him. He had informed the high-grade god king of the emissary group about this, and the latter was very supportive of their actions. So, he was very confident in this matter. The god kings around him nodded, shook their bodies, and then hid in the void. The surrounding heaven and earth were sealed off. In the distance, the god kings of the immortal spirit divine dynasty narrowed their eyes. As they sensed the changes in the void, they all became vigilant. The Titan divine dynasty has made its move. Let's stay put and act according to circumstances. A heavenly god's bone that's exposed to the outside world is an opportunity. The heaven god's bone that is not in the divine emperor's hands is our opportunity. The immortal spirit divine dynasty's experts said. The divine emperor had ordered that the passage to the ancient heaven god's relic would be open tomorrow. Therefore, if they wanted to make a move, they had to do it today. Once they entered the relic, they would lose the chance to make a move. Buzz, the surroundings of the Luo family skyscraper were sealed off. The expression of the perfected god in charge of the building changed abruptly. He sucked in a cold breath. In the perception of his divine sense, he sensed a terrible aura that made him shudder like a cicada in winter. What happened? Rumble. A terrible aura erupted. The perfected god didn't dare to move at all. Swoosh. The sound of something piercing through the air rang out. The surrounding void was sealed off. The god king of the Titan divine dynasty stepped on the wall of the building, flew up, and rushed to the top floor. Before long, he came in front of the transparent glass of the restaurant. His eyes were fixed on the quiet interior of the restaurant. The heaven god's bone is in this restaurant. The corners of the mid-grade god king's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a touch of excitement. He had checked the information before he came here. There were no god kings in this restaurant. There was only a black dog with the strength of a high-grade god, who once killed a mid-grade god king with the heaven god's bone. However, that was with the help of the heaven god's bone. And this time, the high-grade god king of the emissary group had provided him with a barbarian mark that could temporarily seal the power of the heaven god's bone. If the heaven god's bone lost its power, what could a mere high-grade god black dog and a demigod genius do to him? The mid-grade god king's eyes glowed with fire. The next moment, he raised his fist. Then he punched the glass. Heaven god's bone, here I come. The god king roared inwardly. Wrapped in great force, his fist smashed hard on the restaurant's glass. A loud bang rang out. The whole glass trembled violently. Then it remained unscathed. The god king... It didn't break? Did I make a mistake? His fist could break mountains. So how could it not break the glass of a restaurant? No, let's do it again. The god king took a deep breath. His fist was wrapped in divine power. He threw a punch. A hole seemed to be punched through the void. Bam! The fist hit the glass again. The atmosphere was a little awkward. The god king cleared his throat. Looking at the smooth and flawless glass, the corner of his mouth twitched. He rolled his feet. He landed on the roof of the building. I'd better break in. When he reached the door, he raised his hand and pressed it. A creak rang out. The restaurant's door slowly opened. Compared with the indestructible glass, this door was a little different. However, the mid-grade god king didn't think too much. He stepped into the restaurant. He was very confident. He was determined to get the heaven god's bone. What he was afraid of now was the Xiai divine dynasty's guard stopping him. The restaurant was a little dark. The god king stepped into it and glanced around. There were tables, counters, walls, trees, and the dog under the trees. Oh, a dog. On the dog's back was a sparkling, flawless white bone. It was the heaven god's bone he had seen during the day. This god king's breathing became ragged. The heaven god's bone. It's really the heaven god's bone. The god king's mind stirred. A terrifying aura spread out as it flew towards the location of the black dog. Suddenly, in the dark night, a beam of light burst forth. Troublemaker, you will be stripped as an example to others. A mechanical voice rang out in the dark night, making one's hair stand on end. The god king turned his head and saw an iron puppet staring at him. Just a mere puppet. The god king curled his lips in disdain. The puppet flew toward him. The god king raised his hand. Divine power surged, turning his palm a little glassy. Soon, however, his expression changed. The reason for that was because when his palm strike landed on the puppet's body, it was actually shattered. The scene stunned the God King. Rumble. With a backhand, Xiaobai slapped the God King in the face, knocking him back a few steps. What the hell? This puppet is immune to my divine power and laws. He was a mid-grade God King who had comprehended nearly 400 laws. In the restaurant, Xiaobai could be immune to the power of laws. It was a freakish ability. However, in addition to the power of laws, the Titan gods also had a natural advantage in strength. Soon, the mid-grade God King used his strength to force Xiaobai under him. Click! The restaurant's lights came on. At the kitchen door, a thin figure leaned against the door, looking at the mid-grade God King with a straight face. "What are you doing?" Bu Fong said. When the God King saw Bu Fong, his eyes narrowed. "Hand over the heaven god's bone, and I'll spare your life." The aura of this God King erupted. A terrifying aura distorted the void. He stared at Bu Fong, his eyes full of greed. Tap, tap. Upstairs, the sound of footsteps rang out. Then, Yu and Hades' Era went downstairs. When they saw the God King, they looked surprised. Hades' Era covered his mouth with a hand, looking incredulous. Heavens, someone came to steal the mangy dog's bone in the middle of the night? Bu Fong, young man, do you need I to do it? This one is stronger. I might need 4 hours to kill him. Hades' Era said. Bu Fong glanced at Hades' Era with a strange expression and shook his head. Then, he raised a hand and pointed behind the God King. By the time you kill him, it will be dawn. In the direction Bu Fong pointed, Lord Go was holding the heaven god's bone with one paw and looking sideways at the mid-grade God King. A gentle and magnetic voice rang out in the restaurant. I heard someone wants to steal Lord Go's bone. Chapter 1495. Snatching a bone, and a dog's bone at that. To a dog, a bone was no less important than humans' clothes. This was like trying to strip the Lord Go's clothes. It was simply intolerable. A black dog. At this moment, the God King's hair stood on end, and all his hair seemed to stand on end. It was an emotion that spread in an instant, making his heart skip a beat. In that instant, the godly monarch's movements were smooth and fluid. He turned, threw out a punch, and the power of law surged. He had already investigated this black dog before he came here. Although its strength was nothing to be afraid of, with the heaven god's bone, it was extremely terrifying. Previously, this black dog had killed a mid-grade God King who had comprehended nearly 500 laws with a single blow. Therefore, although this God King was confident, he was still very vigilant. The punch seemed to set off a thunderbolt, and the billowing airwaves seemed to blast the air apart. It was indeed at the level of a mid-grade God King. A terrible momentum washed over the Lord Go like a raging wave, trying to completely overturn him. However, it was difficult for such an imposing aura to spread in the restaurant. The mid-grade God King's expression finally changed. He understood the strangeness of this restaurant. If it were a normal restaurant, his punch would have been enough to completely blow it up. A faint snort rang out. It was accompanied by a haughty snort. The next moment, he threw out a bone that was as clear as white jade. It collided with the God King's fist. Crack! A crisp sound rang out. The God King immediately howled out miserably. He actually retreated as his face suddenly paled. Bam! Like a cannonball, the God King shot out in a flash. He slammed it on the table of the restaurant. The table did not budge. This restaurant. The corner of the God King's mouth twitched violently. He felt as if he had fallen into a deep pit, and it would be difficult for him to climb out. The heaven god's bone and the mysterious restaurant. There's something strange about this restaurant. The God King rolled over and rose to his feet. This place is full of mysteries. I can't stay here any longer. I'll take the heaven god's bone and leave as soon as possible. The God King's heart skipped a beat, and his eyes narrowed. In the next moment, the aura on his body began to rise, and the runes on his body seemed to be pulsating. This was a technique of the Titan gods. They called the words drawn on their bodies barbaric text. These barbaric glyphs could provide them with unparalleled power. Boom! It was as if a flame was burning. The God King of the Titan divine dynasty seemed to have become a different person, and his eyes were bright. He took a step forward and shot toward the Lord Go. Tens of thousands of laws filled the air, and law runes wrapped around his body. He forced the Lord Go with one move. The long roar was deafening. All of a sudden, the sound traveled out of the building. Outside the building, the eyes of the waiting God Kings narrowed. Had it begun? They glanced around warily, their auras fluctuating as they sealed off this part of the world to prevent the Shai Divine Dynasty's God Kings from intervening. This was the most dangerous thing the Titan Divine Dynasty had ever done in the Shai Divine Dynasty. This kind of matter had to be settled quickly. If the Divine Emperor found out, they would be in the wrong. Now, they could only hope that the mid-grade God King in the restaurant would be faster. Of course, they were also very confident in the God King. After all, he had the barbaric glyphs given to him by a high-grade god. The kind of barbaric glyphs could temporarily suppress the heaven god's bones immunity. The restaurant kept rumbling. The atmosphere couldn't help but become tense. Inside the restaurant, the barbaric glyphs erupted from the mid-grade God King's body as he rushed toward the Lord Go. This time, he was confident that he would not be knocked away by the heaven god's bone again. That was because he had used the barbaric glyphs that suppressed the heaven god's bone's power. Hand over the heaven god's bone. The mid-grade God King's eyes turned red, and his body moved like lightning. A terrible aura shook the void. The Lord Go narrowed his eyes slightly. Holding the heaven god's bone, he threw it at the God King who was coming at him. The restaurant was not large. The God King's figure was almost teleporting, flashing and flashing. It's useless. I know the heaven god's bone is very scary. But since I know it, how dare I come here and rob it? I have the barbaric glyphs. I'm invincible. The mid-grade God King almost burst out laughing. His body burst into a dazzling light, which was as dazzling as the sun. The barbaric glyphs on it burst into brilliant light. With a bang, he caught the heaven god's bone with his bare hands. The power of the law erupted from it. The Lord Go was slightly taken aback. In the distance, Bufong and Hades' era were also stunned. It seemed that he had come prepared. The power of the law rippled. The power of the heaven god's bone was actually suppressed. It was suppressed. The God King of the Titan Divine Dynasty laughed excitedly. He made a move in an instant, grabbing the heaven god's bone. The power of the law erupted as he exerted force, trying to pull it out of the Lord Go's claws. He exerted force. He yanked it hard. It didn't budge. It didn't budge at all. How is that possible? The God King frowned and stared coldly at the Lord Go. He growled, "Let go of it." The God King's aura fluctuated. He didn't want to waste time with this black dog. Once the Divine Emperor made a move, he really couldn't get the heaven god's bone. The power of the law erupted. More than 300 laws swirled wildly. The void seemed a little overwhelmed and was about to collapse. The Lord Go stared at the God King with his dog eyes. Suddenly, the Lord Go smiled. The corners of the dog's mouth curved upward slightly, and a mocking look appeared on his face. It was a blatant mockery. What the hell? The God King was stunned. The next moment, his pupils constricted. His body seemed to be frozen, motionless. The black dog raised its exquisite paw and waved it in front of his eyes. With a puff, it slapped him in the face. His skin and flesh sank deeply. The flow of time returned to normal. The God King suddenly felt a stabbing pain in his mind. Bam! The God King was sent flying away in an instant. With a bang, he flew out of the restaurant's door and out of the door. He tumbled continuously in the air, carrying the heaven god's bone. The Lord Go walked out of the restaurant with his elegant cat-like steps. Before long, he was hovering in midair. He looked indifferently at the God King in the distance, whose face was covered with blood. Around the building, the experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty were all stunned. What's going on? They actually failed? A mid-grade God King, who possessed the barbaric glyphs bestowed by a high-grade God King, was knocked flying out of the restaurant? Oh, You came in a group. The Lord Go raised his dog eyes slightly, glanced at the people around him, and smiled faintly. His gentle and magnetic voice resounded through the void. The God King was covered with blood. His face was deeply sunken and twisted, and there was a deep paw print on it. His anger was burning like fire. His chest seemed to be about to explode. Let's go together. Let's kill this dog once and for all. The mid-grade God King growled. The eyes of the surrounding Titan Divine Dynasty's experts focused as well. The God King was right. They had to attack together and could not delay any longer. If they did, it was very likely to attract the attention of the Xiai Divine Dynasty's Divine Emperor. Fight! The eyes of the God Kings lit up. Their main responsibility for this trip was to protect the genius, but they would not give up if they could get the Heaven God's bone. Long roars rose into the sky. Wisps of the power of law filled the void. It was as if the surrounding void was boiling. Low-grade God Kings and mid-grade God Kings attacked at the same time. It was a shocking scene. If anyone saw it, they would be petrified. With so many God Kings attacking at the same time, even the battle between the Imperial Concubine and the Divine Chef Temple was not as terrifying as this. Bam! Bam! The void around the restaurant kept cracking and exploding. In the capital of the Divine Dynasty, the sound of something piercing through the air rang out. Black Armor and his guards arrived one after another. They sped over at high speed and looked extremely serious. The experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty are so bold. I can't believe they actually dare to cause trouble in the Divine Dynasty's capital. This is unforgivable. Outside the Luo family skyscraper, the barbaric glyphs had sealed off the void, making it a little blurry. Outside, one warship after another streaked across the sky. The experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty were spying on them. The experts of the Xiai Divine Dynasty had surrounded them. King Pingyang, King Tianlong, the heads of the Luo family and the Zhao family, all the experts descended, their faces gloomy. I can't believe the experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty really dare to attack in Xiai Divine Dynasty's territory. They really don't take the Xiai Divine Dynasty seriously. The barbaric glyphs floated in the air. Black Armor hovered outside, his face cold and gloomy. He raised a hand and punched the glyphs. The void trembled, feeling a powerful sealing intent. He felt a powerful sealing intent. How dare you? Black Armor was furious. This was trespassing on the Xiai Divine Dynasty's territory. How dare they set up a seal in the Divine Dynasty's capital like this? Boom, boom, boom. Inside the seal, a terrible battle broke out. Rumbling sounds rang out incessantly. One God King after another attacked frantically. They knew they had no way out. The mid-grade God Kings and low-grade God Kings unleashed their full power. The terrible power of law seemed to form an ocean. Lord Go was like a small boat in the ocean, about to be capsized in an instant. You're robbing a bone, and you're doing it with such great fanfare. Lord Go took a deep breath. The next moment, his body grew larger. Pitch-black hellfire spread around his body, distorting the void. Blood-colored patterns emerged and wrapped around the Heaven God's bone. 3 heads emerged. Each of them was bursting with a terrible aura. The 3 dog heads opened their mouths at the same time. At the same time, they barked. Woof! Their barks shook the void, causing it to explode. The terrible law of time filled the air. At this moment, the flowing sea of law came to a standstill. All the God Kings focused their eyes. The law of time. Suddenly, a bone fell to the ground. Bam! A low-grade God King's head suddenly exploded. With a bang, blood spurted out. The power of law in his body exploded in an instant. Like a peerless savage beast, Lord Go rushed into the group of God Kings with great terror and began a massacre. Naturally, the low-grade God Kings could not withstand a single blow from Lord Go. After all, he was a heaven-defying dog who had comprehended the law of time. However, the mid-grade God Kings could withstand it. Bam! However, when the Heaven God's bone hit them, they howled miserably. Their bones broke, and their blood splattered across the sky. The god kings of the Titan divine dynasty all looked horrified. They were puzzled and puzzled. Why couldn't he suppress this black dog with the barbaric glyphs bestowed by a high-grade god king? He was just a black dog that was only a high-grade god. However, the law of time and the heaven god's bone seemed to have undergone a qualitative change. This was a peerless, fierce dog. In the restaurant, Bu Fong's eyes lit up. His mind surged as he sensed the laws drifting all over the sky. He stretched out his hand, and a ball of silver flames suddenly burned in his palm. He flicked his finger. The divine flame darted out, turned into a stream of light, and shot out. In an instant, countless laws were absorbed by the flame. Like a whale, the souls of the god kings killed by Lord Go with the heaven god's bone were devoured, but their fleshly bodies and laws were powerless to spread. In Bu Fong's view, these were all resources. Lord Go was on a rampage, while Bu Fong was taking advantage of the situation. This time, his divine flame should be much stronger. When he became a god, its power would surely shake heaven and earth. Crack! Crack! Cracks appeared on the barbaric glyphs that sealed the void. Black armor focused his eyes. He let out a long roar. Then, he threw a punch at the seal. The sturdy barbaric glyph seal was instantly smashed by the punch, turning into specks of light that filled the sky and dissipating. However, he smashed the barbaric text seal. Black armor's eyes narrowed, and he sucked in a cold breath. A strong smell of blood filled the air. Countless laws floated around the restaurant, and a silver flame chased after and devoured them. Among them, the corpses of several god kings floated weakly. The blood of several mid-grade god kings splashed across the sky like dead dogs. A pair of eyes swept over. Black armor's heart skipped a beat. In the distant sky, a violent three-headed black dog was holding a heaven god's bone with blood-colored patterns and staring at him with a grin. Terrifying, very terrifying. Black armor's heart seemed to clench at this moment. Boom! In the direction of the residence of the Titan Divine Dynasty's emissary group in the capital of the Divine Dynasty, a terrible aura soared into the sky, filled with infinite shock and anger. How dare you, black dog? How dare you kill the god kings of the Titan Divine Dynasty? Give me your dog life. Chapter 1496. A peerless dog. It's really a peerless dog. Black armor was startled when he sensed the terrifying aura of a ferocious beast that surged towards him. His body shrank, and he felt a great terror surging within him. Although it was just a high-grade god black dog, it inexplicably made his heart palpitate. Of course, perhaps it was because of the scene at the moment that he could not help but feel a chill. The broken bodies of god kings lingering in the void, and the terrible dog bathed in God's blood at this moment. The black earth prison flame and the blood-stained heaven god's bone made the black dog look like a reaper who had walked out of hell. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were stunned. They never thought that the simultaneous action of so many experts of the Titan divine dynasty would result in such a miserable end, with so many low-grade god kings dying miserably on the spot. It was worth noting that the importance of god kings to a divine dynasty was self-evident. The guard behind black armor sucked in their breaths. King Pingyong, King Tianlong, and the other experts also felt a chill. It was too terrible. The black dog bathed in God's blood had completely changed their opinion of him. They could not believe that this black dog really dared to kill so wantonly. However, they had to say that it was a good kill. When the emissaries of the Titan Divine Dynasty came to the Shai Divine Dynasty, they were quite humble at first, but a few days later, they became more and more arrogant. Perhaps they dared to be so presumptuous because they knew that the Divine Emperor's time was coming to an end. King Pingyong and the others did not dare to cause trouble for the Divine Dynasty, which caused the Titan Divine Dynasty to start a war. Therefore, they had to swallow their anger. But this time they were really satisfied. Bufong was also very satisfied. The divine flame was devouring wantonly. Countless laws were fused into it, making it shine even more silver. It was as if silver was melting and burning. The scorching heat distorted the void. Of course, at the moment, everyone's eyes were not on the flame. Instead, they were fixed on a black dog holding the heaven god's bone. In the sky, a terrible aura was rolling over. It was the aura of a high-grade god king, a true high-grade god king. He was much stronger than black and white. He was the top expert of the Titan divine dynasty. He was in charge of protecting the geniuses and monstrous geniuses on this trip. However, this powerhouse was burning with anger at this moment. He roared, and his body flew across the sky as if he was going to tear the sky apart. Even the sky was distorted. This was a truly terrifying existence. The air in the entire capital seemed to boil at this moment. It's Heavenly King Tai Hang. We're saved. Damn that black dog. Terrifying. The black dog, who has comprehended the law of time and the heavenly god's bone, is practically invincible. The god kings of the Titan divine dynasty, who are covered in blood, breathed sighs of relief, their eyes filled with the joy of surviving a disaster. They didn't die. They survived. If Heaven King Tai Hang showed up, he would definitely be able to save them. Heavenly King Tai Hang was a high-grade god king who had comprehended 1,000 laws of nature. His strength was so strong that it could penetrate the heavens and the earth. As for the Shai divine dynasty's accusation, the mid-grade god kings of the Titan divine dynasty, however, did not care. If they obtained the heavenly god's bone, they would naturally have to fear the divine emperor. Even though the divine emperor was in his twilight years, he was still the divine emperor. However, since they did not obtain the heavenly god's bone, the significance was completely different. If the divine emperor punished them for not obtaining the heavenly god's bone, Elder Tai Hang would definitely be able to protect them. Moreover, if the divine emperor insisted on killing them, it would certainly cause a conflict between the Titan divine dynasty and the Shai divine dynasty. This was something that the current divine emperor could not bear. Therefore, they understood that when Elder Tai Hang appeared, they would survive. Unfortunately, they would not have the chance to obtain the heavenly god's bone. The law of time combined with the heavenly god's bone was indeed terrifying. Even a dog could stir up a storm. The terrible voice was interrogative, causing the void to tremble and crack. Lord Go's 3 heads looked up at the same time, his blood-red eyes gleaming as he stared at the void. There, a bare-chested powerhouse with runes all over his body stepped through the air toward them. His body was magnificent, and his hair was like needles. His eyes flickered, and his aura fluctuated. Oh, a high-grade god king? A grave look came into Lord Go's eyes. But it was just a grave look. Although it was still a little difficult for Lord Go to fight a high-grade god king now, he could still protect himself. Moreover, Lord Go did not believe that he would dare to make a move in the Divine Dynasty's capital under the nose of the old Divine Emperor. Although the old Divine Emperor was old, he was not dead yet. Rumble. His steps were like the evening drum and morning bell. Every step he took made everyone's energy and blood boil. His frightening aura was like a tidal wave, constantly slamming against the shore, causing the reefs to crumble and crack. A high-grade god king was extremely terrifying. Some demigods who were hiding in a corner and watching secretly could not bear the pull of this aura. They grunted and coughed up blood. The heirs of aristocratic families and the young masters all looked horrified. All the high-grade god kings of the Shai divine dynasty had entered the ancient heaven god's relic, so they usually did not have the chance to see a high-grade god king. But when they saw one this time, they were surprised. A god emperor was naturally stronger than a high-grade god king, but his strength had reached the level of returning to its original state. Without unleashing his aura, he was no different from an ordinary old man. This high-grade god king of the Titan divine dynasty, on the other hand, was so domineering that he forced everyone present. Dong! 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 The void seemed to freeze. God King Tai Hang's eyes shone like torches. A wheel of law emerged over his head. Countless laws were swirling in it, a total of 1,000 of them. This was what a high-grade god king relied on. His gaze swept across the crowd, and some demigods could not bear the pressure and felt as if their bodies were cracking. Heaven King Tai Hang was a top expert in the Titan Divine Dynasty. The Titan Divine Dynasty had 4 heavenly kings, and he was one of them. The Titan Divine Emperor attached great importance to this exchange, so he sent Tai Hang. But now, a god king of the Titan Divine Dynasty was slaughtered by a dog. Of course, Heaven King Tai Hang also knew that the Titan Divine Dynasty's god king was in the wrong. But what was there to be afraid of? As long as he was here, he was in the right. If they failed to get the Heaven God's bone, was the Divine Emperor going to kill them all? He was a Heaven King of the Titan Divine Dynasty, and if the Divine Emperor killed him, it would be a declaration of war against the Titan Divine Dynasty. Would the shy Divine Emperor, who was past his prime, dare to do that? Rumble. A terrible aura towered into the sky, as if to set off blasts. Heaven King Tai Hang walked fearlessly, heading straight for the Lord Go. Damn dog, you dare to kill a god king of the Titan Divine Dynasty? You'll die with him. Tai Hang exhaled, stirring up a gust of wind. The void trembled. The surrounding void cracked, and the turbulence lashed at him, but he was unscathed. His fleshly body was too strong. As a Heaven King, not only was his power of law strong, but his fleshly body was even more terrifying. Those who could become Heaven Kings were also top existences among high-grade God Kings. The Lord Go's 3 dog heads grinned at the same time and sneered disdainfully. In midair, the mid-grade God King of the Titan Divine Dynasty fled frantically into the distance. If they want to snatch my Heaven God bone from the Lord Go, they should be prepared to die. They have only themselves to blame for this. The Lord Go said in a gentle voice, "They have only themselves to blame? You have only yourself to blame for this. Then you have only yourself to blame for me killing you." Heaven King Tai Hang's gaze seemed to tear the sky apart. He roared, his hair seeming to tear the sky apart. He threw out a palm. As he did so, his palm soared against the wind, growing bigger and bigger in midair. In just a flash, it was bigger than any skyscraper, blotting out the sky as it slapped down toward the Lord Go. The earth prison fire burned around the Lord Go, and his eyes burst into a dazzling light. A dog's bark shook the heavens. The law of time erupted in an instant. Rumble. The surrounding void seemed to be stagnant. This was a heaven-defying means. However, the law of time, break it. Heaven King Tai Hang's blood and energy surged as he opened his mouth and roared. He could not believe that he had used his fleshly body to break the shackles of the law of time. This was the power of a Heaven King of the Titan Divine Dynasty. The palm continued to fall from the sky. The expressions of black armor and the others had already changed. The attack of a Heaven King was already beyond his control. In fact, the high-grade God Kings who led the emissary groups of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty were not ordinary God Kings. Each of their attacks was enough to cause a stir in the Divine Dynasty. Of course, Black Armor didn't think that these 2 God Kings would easily attack in the capital. Rumble. Barbaric glyphs surged over the terrible palm. Although Heaven King Tai Hang had broken the law of time of the Lord Go, the others couldn't. However, the others were unable to break it. The few mid-grade God Kings who were fleeing felt that they had stepped into a swamp and couldn't move at all. This terrified them. A 3-headed black dog appeared in front of them, strutting its enchanting cat-like steps. The bloodstained bone smashed down. A boom rang out. A mid-grade God King finally couldn't bear the burden. His body cracked and shattered. In the restaurant, Bu Fong's eyes lit up. His divine sense surged as he controlled the divine flame and moved it toward the mid-grade God King's body. Soon, it devoured the dissipating power of the law. Bu Fong felt refreshed. A man and a dog. Both of you are courting death. Tai Hang's voice turned cold. He fixed his eyes on Bu Fong and the Lord Go, revealing his killing intent. A dog had killed a Titan God King, and that man had devoured the law of God Kings. This was a blasphemy against the Titan Divine clan. The sky-blotting palm slapped toward the restaurant. intending to destroy everything. The black dog couldn't run away. In midair, the experts of the Shai divine dynasty and the immortal spirit divine dynasty felt their hearts palpitate. Black Armor was even more anxious. Why hasn't His Majesty made a move yet? If he doesn't, the whole capital will be turned upside down. Bufang expressionlessly looked at the huge hand that covered the sky. The might of the hand made Bufang's heart palpitate. He was indeed unable to block it. After all, he was only a demigod. Killing low-grade god kings and fighting mid-grade god kings was already his limit. And that was under the condition that these god kings had not comprehended the supreme law. Bufang had no chance of beating a high-grade god king. Perhaps crushing the god of cooking's divine power liquid drop would allow him to withstand the blow. Bufang didn't know what the limit of the god of cooking's divine power liquid drop was. The Lord Go's 3 heads turned. His gaze seemed to sharpen. Why isn't the divine emperor making a move? This old man is playing tricks with me. It makes me happy to be mischievous. Unfortunately, this old man has forgotten that I, the Lord Go, have an awesome chef behind me. His figure flickered. The Lord Go stood in front of the restaurant in an instant. Bufang boy. Fortune flatbread. The Lord Go's gentle and magnetic voice rang out. Standing at the top of the building, Bufang, his vermilion robe flapping noisily, narrowed his eyes. A fortune flatbread? Bufang understood what the Lord Go meant. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. He raised his hand. The silver divine flame returned, floating and burning in his palm. 3 fortune flatbreads emerged and were wrapped in the silver divine flame. The fortune flatbread was surrounded by fortune chi. The next moment, Bufang flicked his fingers. The 3 flatbreads turned into streams of light and shot toward the Lord Go, who was burning with earth prison flame. As the man who stood behind the Lord Go, Bufang consciously added something to the flatbreads. The fortune flatbread baked with the divine flame. Lord Go explode. A ripping sound rang out. The 3 flatbreads turned into streams of silver light and shot out. The Lord Go's eyes flashed with blood-red light as he opened his mouth. The 3 dog heads opened their mouths at the same time and swallowed the flatbreads. Gulp, the flatbreads entered their mouths. They looked at the cold Tai hang in the sky. They looked at the terrifying palm that was slapping toward them. They looked at the faintly discernible gaze in the void. The Lord Go twitched his mouth. Then he let out a burp. These people have no idea how powerful Bufang boy is. Chapter 1497. The Fortune Flatbread. It was all about fortune. To put it bluntly, it all depended on luck. Although Bufang did not change the flatbread fundamentally by baking it with the divine flame, the power of the 1,000 laws contained in the divine flame washed it, giving it extraordinary energy. Each of Lord Go's 3 dog heads bit off a piece of fortune flatbread. Without chewing, they swallowed it directly. A steady stream of fortune gas immediately gushed out and poured into Lord Go's body. The earth prison fire around Lord Go grew more and more intense, so much so that it seemed to blot out the sky. It was extremely terrifying. In the sky, Titan Heaven King sneered. He didn't care about the black dog's behavior at all. Eating flatbread? What's the use of eating a flatbread? Can a flatbread defy the heavens? Besides, it's just a flatbread cooked by a demigod chef. As the Heaven King of the Titan divine dynasty, the only thing he believed in was strength. In this chaotic universe, strength was everything. If it weren't for the divine emperor's formidable strength, Tai Hang would have dared to knock him off his pedestal. However, the reason why the divine emperor was called the divine emperor was because of his formidable strength. Tai Hang couldn't refute that. Rumble. The palm came crashing down as if to shatter everything. Lord Go let out a deafening roar as if to destroy heaven and earth. After devouring the fortune flatbread, fortune gas circulated, making Lord Go's aura much stronger. However, that was not the point. Rumble. Tai Hang's palm contained mysterious barbaric glyphs, which had the power to suppress the heaven god's bone. Therefore, if the black dog planned to use the heaven god's bone to break his move, it would definitely be smashed into minced meat by his palm. Moreover, even the skyscraper would be wiped out by his palm. He was a heaven king, and who dared to easily resist the might of a heaven king? Anyone who resisted him would have to pay a price. Rumble. Lord Go's 3 dog heads barked. Sound waves blasted out. Bam! An invisible force collided with the palm that blotted out the sky. A terrible rumble kept sweeping out. In the sky, Heaven King Tai Hang's pupils constricted. He could sense an unparalleled aura from the black dog's position. It was the aura of the loss. Bang! With a loud bang, the restriction on the palm disappeared. The next thing that appeared was a black dog that seemed to have become even more bizarre. Each of the black dog's 3 heads had a restless energy floating in its mouth. The first head was engulfed by the gray power of the law of space. The second head was the law that Lord Go possessed, the law of time. Contained within the third head was the law of destruction, the law of destruction. 3 heads, 3 laws of nature, 3 supreme laws of the universe. At this moment, it wasn't just Heavenly King Tai Hang who gasped. Everyone present gasped as well. Even a mysterious figure hiding in the void couldn't help but cry out. 3 supreme laws of the universe? How is this possible? How did this black dog undergo such a huge transformation? People like Bu Fong and the Crown Prince, who had comprehended 2 supreme laws of the universe, were already considered geniuses among geniuses. But now, this black dog had comprehended 3 supreme laws of the universe. No, wasn't comprehension. Heaven King Tai Hang narrowed his eyes, and there seemed to be a bright light flashing in his eyes. There was something strange about this. Even the strongest geniuses of the chaotic universe couldn't comprehend 2 more supreme laws of the universe in an instant. Was it because of the flatbread just now? Heaven King Tai Hang was no fool. After thinking about it carefully, he found something strange. It was most likely because of the flatbread. The people around him were no fools either. They all gasped. Their eyes were bursting with light and disbelief. 3 supreme laws of the universe. Just by eating a flatbread, he comprehended 2 supreme laws of the universe. Others couldn't even comprehend 1 law if they wanted to. But this black dog was so terrifying. Was a man inferior to a dog? Rumble. Lord Go felt the swelling power, which made the Lord Go's mouth curl up involuntarily. The next moment, he looked up and his eyes burst into a dazzling light. 3 supreme laws of the universe. This is what makes Bufong Boy so powerful. He carried the heavenly god's bone. His figure suddenly shot up and turned into a pitch-black figure, shooting across the void. He tore through the sky, causing the void to tremble. He raised the heaven god's bone and threw it at Heaven King Tai Hang. Everyone held their breaths. It's resisting. The black dog is resisting. Heaven King Tai Hang's body suddenly tensed up, and a mighty power erupted from him. How arrogant! I don't know where the 3 supreme laws of the universe came from, but you have no idea what the might of a heaven god means. Heaven King Tai Hang roared. The next moment, his body burst into a dazzling light. Buzz, a disk of law, emerged over Heaven King Tai Hang's head. The runes of law danced and shone brightly. Heaven King Tai Hang has also comprehended 1 supreme law of the universe. Even if this black dog unleashes 3 supreme laws of the universe, he may not be able to win. The gap between them is not that easy to bridge. The Titan gods said excitedly. Roar! The law of destruction erupted. Heaven King Tai Hang's body suddenly swelled. Like the palm he had thrown out, he began to expand. It slowly swelled up. Rumble! Terrifying barbaric glyphs pulsed. The next moment, the whole capital seemed to have become small. Heaven King Tai Hang had grown to a height of 10,000 feet, standing tall. The whole capital was alarmed. The people looked at the huge figure in horror. A terrible aura pervaded the air, making them kneel involuntarily. Some of the experts were also shivering under this pressure. He was too strong. This was the might of a heaven god. Rumble. Heaven King Tai Hang, who had transformed into a towering titan, had torch-like eyes. Then, he pointed a finger at Lord Go, who was galloping away. That finger, it caused the void to shatter continuously, and terrifying explosions could be heard. Bam! As Lord Go held the heaven god's bone, the blood-colored patterns on it seemed to come to life and kept pulsing. An explosion occurred. The power of countless laws pervaded the air. 3 supreme laws of the universe were too powerful. However, Heaven King Tai Hang's laws were stronger. 1 supreme law of the universe and 1,000 ordinary laws were enough to bridge the gap between the 2 supreme laws. Blood-colored light and earthy yellow light swirled in the sky. Rumble. The sky was torn apart. It was as if the chaotic universe had descended. High in the sky, a wheel of law emerged. The wheel of law seemed to tear everything apart. It caused the void to tremble. This was a punishment from the laws of the chaotic universe. The collision of the 2 laws had exceeded the limit of this world. Rumble. A crackling sound rang out. A bolt of lightning fell from the sky. Lord Go flew backward, spun in the air, and slammed into the building. The entire building shook violently. Bufong put his hands behind his back and looked indifferently at Lord Go. His hand shook. The blue and white porcelain plate flew out. A plate of sweet and sour dragon ribs. Bufong said. Lord Go took the plate, opened his mouth, and sucked. All the ribs went into his mouth in an instant. Lord Go stuck out his tongue and licked the ribs. Then, his aura returned to normal. Heaven King Tai Hang was still standing tall. His terrible aura seemed to blow up this part of the world. I can't believe you can block my finger. After transforming into a titan, my strength is incomparably terrifying. I can't believe a mere high-grade god can block it. Heaven King Tai Hang's pupils constricted slightly. This made the killing intent in his heart soar. This black dog's talent is somewhat exceptional, and so is that chef. If these 2 fellows stay in the Shai Divine Dynasty, it will not be a good thing for the Titan Divine Dynasty. So kill. Heaven King Tai Hang focused his eyes. The next moment, he took a step forward. The Titan stood tall, his body almost rushing into the clouds. He clenched his fist, and 1,000 laws spread out. Rumble. A terrifying roar suddenly exploded. Divine power descended. In the direction of the palace, a figure slowly walked over from the sky with his hands clasped behind his back. It was an old man, his white hair waving in the wind. He was very old, and his aura was almost decaying. His eyes were cloudy, but they were full of sharp light. Black Armor was pleasantly surprised when he saw the old man. The Divine Emperor. The expressions of the experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty all changed. The Shai Divine Emperor had finally made a move. Heaven King Tai Hang jerked his head around and stared at the old man. Even though the old man was so old, he still became the focus of heaven and earth as soon as he appeared. Enough. You've caused trouble in the capital. For the sake of the Titan Divine Emperor, I'll spare your life. You may be spared from death, but you must be punished. I'll cut off one of your arms as a warning to others. The Divine Emperor's magnificent voice rang out, shaking heaven and earth. Everyone sucked in a cold breath. Cut off an arm? His Excellency is going to cut off Heaven King Tai Hang's arm. Will this lead to a war between the 2 divine dynasties? Cut off one of my arms. Heaven King Tai Hang's pupils constricted. I respect you as the Divine Emperor, so I'll give you some face. Do you really think you're a peak Divine Emperor? Heaven King Tai Hang said coldly. His Titan body moved abruptly, and he threw a punch at the Divine Emperor. Everyone's expression changed dramatically. This is crazy. Is Heaven King Tai Hang high from fighting? This is crazy. That's the Divine Emperor, a top expert who represents a divine dynasty. How dare Heaven King Tai Hang make a move? Lord Go and Bu Fong narrowed their eyes. This old man doesn't seem to be very intimidating, said Lord Go, who had returned to his chubby body and was chewing on his sweet and sour ribs. Bu Fong, on the other hand, was expressionless. How presumptuous! Black armor flew into a rage. King Pingyang, King Tianlong, and the heads of the various aristocratic families all looked angry. In the direction of the palace, the crown prince glared at him. How dare he disobey my father's divine might? This heaven king from the Titan divine dynasty is courting death. The crown prince had absolute confidence in the divine emperor. The divine emperor's face was indifferent. Tai Hang's counterattack was beyond everyone's expectation. Even the divine emperor was a little surprised. However, he was just a little surprised. Treason. You've offended your superiors. That's one more crime. I'll break your limbs. The divine emperor said indifferently. His voice seemed to be a little weak. Heaven King Tai Hang's eyes gleamed. Today, he wanted to fight the divine emperor. Boom. It was a punch that could pierce through heaven and earth. That indomitable giant titan was like a giant ape that could shake the heavens. He slapped his chest with both fists, then smashed them down hard. The divine emperor's eyes were cloudy as he cleared his throat. Facing Heaven King Tai Hang's punch, slowly he reached out his palm. Then, he raised his palm and threw out a slap. Chapter 1498. Attacking the divine emperor was simply the behavior of a lunatic. A deity emperor in his twilight years was still a deity emperor. His strength was incredible. Even if Heaven King Heaven Hang had transformed into a towering titan, his strength would not change much. He was still a high-grade god king. The fact that he dared to provoke the divine emperor in such an impudent manner caused everyone present to gasp. But everyone's heart skipped a beat, and some of them even tensed up in disappointment. If the God King was truly defeated, it would be a major event that would shake the entire Chaos-verse. The Divine Emperor of the Xiai Divine Dynasty was defeated by the Titan Divine Dynasty's Heavenly King. This news was enough to shock everyone. Heavenly King Tai Hang's eyes burst with dazzling light as he punched out. It shook the heavens and earth as if it wanted to shatter the mountains. The power of this punch was extremely terrifying. This was the deterrent power of a high-grade God King. The Divine Emperor was past his prime. He stood in the void like an old man with one foot in the grave. He calmly faced godly King Tai Hang's punch. A slap flew out. The Divine Emperor said that he would break Heavenly King Tai Hang's limbs. Since the Divine Emperor had spoken, he naturally had to do it. The words of the Divine Emperor represented the Divine Emperor. If he couldn't do it, it would naturally cause the Divine Emperor to lose a lot of face. Rumble. Under everyone's gaze, the Divine Emperor slapped him across the face. It was as if he had shattered the void, and his palm slammed against Divine Emperor Tai Hang's fist. A loud rumble rang out as God King Tai Hang's towering body threw out a punch that collided with the God Emperor's palm. The power of that punch was indeed terrifying. There was a cracking sound. Divine King Tai Hang's fist was covered in cracks like a porcelain doll's. It looked extremely miserable. There was an explosion. Monstrous chi and blood surged out from the cracks. God King Tai Hang's pupils constricted. His blazing body began to crumble, turning into a pile of rubble. It smashed into the ground with a boom, sending up thousands of pieces of debris. One arm was severed. An uproar instantly broke out. At this moment, the whole Divine Dynasty burst into an uproar, and everyone's eyes were filled with fanaticism and worship. This was their Divine Emperor, a Divine Emperor who could help them prop up the world. His Majesty the Divine Emperor was mighty. Black armor King Pingyang and the others all looked excited, clenched their fists, and their auras fluctuated. The experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty, on the other hand, turned pale. As expected, he still lost. Tai Hang was really crazy to deal with the Divine Emperor. The experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty also gasped. The power of the Divine Emperor was shocking. God King Tai Hang only had himself to blame. The Divine Emperor clasped his hands behind his back and looked indifferent. His white hair spread out. He wore a dragon robe and walked step by step. One of God King Tai Hang's arms was severed, and blood splattered across the sky. He took a step back. However, the Divine Emperor raised his palm towards his body again. Rumble. The 10,000-year-old laws pervaded the air. The power of countless laws in the sky seemed to converge into an arm, which grabbed Heaven King Tai Hang's other hand and yanked it back. There was a tearing noise. Blood splattered on the spot. Another arm was severed. God King Tai Hang howled miserably, his voice echoing for thousands of miles. However, the Divine Emperor did not stop at all. His face was as stern and cold as ever. Rumble. One slap, another slap, and another. In the face of God King Tai Hang, the Divine Emperor kept throwing out palms as if he were teaching a child. With every slap, God King Tai Hang let out a miserable howl. Cracks appeared on one of his legs, which looked like a pillar that reached the sky, and then it broke into pieces. God King Tai Hang's fleshly body lost its balance, and he fell to the ground with a thud. At the same time, his 100,000-foot-tall Titan body kept shrinking. Finally, he turned into an ordinary person, but his appearance was extremely miserable. Blood gushed out like a fountain. God King Tai Hang's eyes widened. Finally, fear showed on his face. Impossible. God Emperor, you're past your prime. Why do you still dare to attack like this? Aren't you afraid of the suppression of the will of the universe? Aren't you afraid of the calamity? God King Tai Hang roared hoarsely. God King Tai Hang only had one leg left. He flipped to his feet and stomped on the void, creating a hole in it. With a rumble, he soared into the sky. It's none of your business. The Divine Emperor rolled his eyes. Finally, he sent out another palm strike. Heaven King Tai Hang's body exploded, causing him to fall from the void. His four limbs were all broken, and he was in an extremely miserable state. Wear black armor and gold armor. The Divine Emperor clasped his hands behind his back, his dragon robe flapping in the wind. Black armor and golden armor transformed into black and golden light, respectively, and flew over. They knelt before the God Emperor with respectful expressions. Lock up Heaven King Tai Hang's fleshly body and throw him into the dungeon. If you want to ransom him, ask the Titan Divine Emperor himself. The Divine Emperor said. After saying that, he lightly coughed. Let's disperse this matter. If you continue to cause trouble, I won't be polite anymore. The Divine Emperor turned around and hid in the void again. He came and went in a mysterious manner. Everyone kept quiet out of fear, not daring to say anything more. The bearing of a Divine Emperor was indeed terrifying. Lord Go and Bu Fong were standing on the top of the building, watching calmly. This old man is indeed powerful. Lord Go stuck out his tongue and said. Bu Fong nodded. The Divine Emperor's strength was the strongest he had ever met. However, Bu Fong frowned. He had a strange feeling. The Divine Emperor was strong, but he gave Bu Fong a feeling that he was short of breath. Under the monstrous pressure, there was a sense of emptiness. Bu Fong shook his head. These things had little to do with him. Bu Fong twitched the corner of his mouth. With his hands clasped behind his back, he glanced indifferently at the experts in the distant sky. The experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty and the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty were all silent. Sure enough, the deterrent power of the Divine Emperor was still there. The fact that a high-grade God King's limbs were broken was absolutely terrifying. The air seemed to be filled with the blood of a God King, and rich energy was spreading and boiling. The Divine Emperor turned and left. The surrounding experts also left one after another. Bu Fong and Lord Go also returned to the restaurant and closed the door. And so this storm ended in such a way. In the palace, the Divine Emperor returned with his hands clasped behind his back. He dismissed the eunuchs and maids in the palace and sat straight in his seat. Cough, cough, cough. The Divine Emperor opened his mouth and coughed violently. There seemed to be a hint of darkness on his face. It was as if a unique and profound law was lingering around the Divine Emperor's body. It made him feel an aura of death spreading. The Great Tribulation, the calamity. The Divine Emperor's crown fell off, and his white hair hung loose. He was in severe pain all over, but after enduring it for a long time, he finally opened his eyes. Beads of sweat broke out on his forehead. The divine emperor's face was extremely unsightly. Every time he attacked, he would bring forward the great tribulation and make the calamity more intense. Even if Bufong's oyster pancake could temporarily suppress it, it would not last long. His many days of cultivation had all gone to waste in today's fight. In fact, the Great Tribulation was even stronger than before. When the Divine Emperor was in his twilight years, a Great Tribulation would befall him. Because their strength was too strong and beyond the limit, it was their punishment. Huff, huff, huff. The Divine Emperor sat in his chair, panting heavily. After a long time, trembling, he left the palace, put on plain clothes, and turned into a plain old man. Then, he left the palace and headed toward Bufong's restaurant. The night was over. The first ray of morning sunlight was cast on the planet. The battle caused a stir in the entire divine dynasty. The divine emperor's powerful attack had restrained the thoughts of many people in the court. The divine emperor struck with lightning speed, breaking God King Tai Hang's limbs and throwing a heavenly king into prison. It was a deterrent. Everyone who thought the divine emperor was in his twilight years changed their minds. The next day, it was the day when the ancient heaven god's relic was supposed to be opened. The experts of the emissary group were all going into the relic, which was the main purpose of their trip. The sun was high up in the sky. The divine emperor had just appeared, and he was still as mysterious and majestic as ever. He recited many words. At last, he ended the conversation, raised a hand, and produced a seal. The seal shot into the sky, causing it to tremble. The void twisted and spun, revealing a huge entrance. That entrance was the entrance to the relic. There was no doubt about it. The experts of the emissary group rushed into it. After all the experts had entered, Bufong's eyes widened. A black dog, carrying a bone on its back, followed them. At that moment, the whole world fell silent. After a long time, the crowd burst into an uproar. That black dog had also gone to the relic. Bufong knew very well that the Lord Go had gone to the relic. The Lord Go had told Bufong that he would enter the relic again. However, Bufong did not choose to step into it. A creak rang out. He opened the restaurant's door. Sunlight poured in. Bufong was cooking in the kitchen. His wok-tossing and knife skills had already reached the acme of perfection. Buzz, just as Bufong was practicing his dishes. In his mind, the system's solemn and serious voice, which had not been heard for a long time, rang out. Bufong was taken aback. Temporary task. Please go to the ancient heaven god's relic and help the divine flame devour the laws of the ancient heaven god. Task reward. 1 fruit of law. Huh? A temporary task? Bufong's movements paused, and he furrowed his brows. It had been a long time since the last task was issued. Bufong did not expect the system to issue a temporary task at this juncture. Moreover, the task was to help the divine flame devour the laws of the ancient heaven god. The system, was it arrogant? Was it too arrogant? Was it that easy to devour the laws of the heaven god? High-grade god kings had 1,000 laws, so how many would the ancient heaven gods have? It was simply a pipe dream for the divine flame to devour the laws of the heaven god. Besides, the heaven god had fallen a long time ago, and the laws of the heaven god were no longer as clear as before. However, the system's task reward made Bufong narrow his eyes. The fruit of law. Another fruit of law. What was the system trying to do? Bufong did not know whether he would comprehend another supreme law of the universe if he devoured another fruit of law. If he did, Bufong would certainly become the first existence in the entire chaotic universe to comprehend 3 supreme laws of the universe. It would be an honor and a source of pride for him. Bufong found that the task reward given by the system was something Bufong could not refuse. Therefore, Bufong fell in a deep thought. The contemplation did not last long. Bufong made up his mind. He would enter the ancient heaven god's relic for no other reason than the fruit of law. When the system issued this temporary task, Bufong's heart suddenly beat faster. Suddenly, his heart started to beat faster. If he obtained a few more fruits of law, would he become the first demigod to comprehend all the supreme laws of the universe? By then, how strong would Bufong be? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.